Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Street Army sends its regards.
Ще не вмерла України ні слава, ні воля. Ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer. I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all once again on day 246 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. And believe it or not, everyone, but we found out that the Russians have pulled one of the largest scoops of the past few months of the war. That's the reason for tonight's thumbnail and title. As in a murky, dingy basement in a derelict building in the middle of Balakiya, Ukrainian forces stumbled upon today thousands and thousands of pages detailing Russian force numbers, Russian positions, and the conditions of their troops before the massive retreat that occurred a month and a half ago. This information is invaluable, and of course, real quick, let me get some picture and video evidence to show y'all this. On this Twitter post, we can see a picture of this headquarters that they found in the basement of this building, and within this headquarters, which apparently is multi-roomed, there are loads of military documents that detail everything about the Russian armed forces in this area. Now, I would have to say, when you're leaving an area, when you're retreating or in an absolute rout, it feels like the most important thing to do would be to destroy the classified information before you leave or take it with you. For some reason, they didn't do either, and they just left them there, and now the Ukrainians have found them. This is massive news. In fact, this may be one of the most important changes in the war in this area for a while, because now it's not going to be, well, it will still be guesswork to a way, I'll say that real quick, but it's not going to be guesswork like it was before, where the Ukrainian armed forces, along with satellite imagery, would say, well, it looks like this Russian brigade has about this many tanks left. Now they can sit there and say, based off of the information we have from a month to a month and a half ago, this specific unit had that many tanks, that many soldiers, this much equipment, and that many supplies. This was their supply route, and we can assume that they were this strong when they got pushed back. Based off of that, we can now assume that they're this strong. And the guesstimate, and also the idea of how the Russian armed forces in this area are operating, is going to be a lot better than before. And I have to say, if anything, this has been the largest setback, and I'm sure, and hopefully I'm not wrong here, but I'm sure that we'll see within the coming weeks that this is going to be one of the biggest setbacks of the Russian armed forces in the entirety of this war. And, you know, Mandy, I'm just thinking, the Russians that left this command post, you know, they were probably in a truck or something, driving away from Balakiya, and one of them went, hey, Ivan, do you think we left anything important behind? And one of them went, oh, no, as long as it wasn't top secret, we are okay, comrade. And they left behind everything in the command post to be found.
Maybe so.
I mean,
I wonder if it was really that or if it's a setup, because to be honest with you, it kind of seems a little too good to be true.
Well, I mean, like, then again, it doesn't seem that untrue, because we do have to remember that the Russians did leave behind a T-90M intact, abandoned on the front line before, which is their best fieldable tank in the entire field of this war and in the entire Russian arsenal. And to think that they left such a high-tech piece of equipment not destroyed on the front line show that the Russians don't really have a lot of follow-through, and maybe this headquarters was being packed up so quickly, or it wasn't being packed up at all. The order to evacuate this headquarters came so fast and they had such little time that they just picked up and literally left them behind. I feel like it wouldn't be too outside of the Russian norm to do something like that, but let us know in the live chat, what do y'all think about this? Do y'all think this is a setup by the Russians? Do y'all think that this was a planned maneuver? And this one, and it could be a planned maneuver, I will say that. This wouldn't be the first time in history that documents have been planted to throw off the other side, and in this instance, to throw off the Ukrainians. But considering how incompetent the Russians have made themselves out to be at this point in the war, they have not made themselves out to be a clean force that makes sure to take care of everything that they can think of. Usually, they're a very sloppy force that doesn't really do anything that they're supposed to, and even the things that they just need to do. And so with that, this is probably going to become incredibly important and pertinent as the war continues on, and while we are probably not going to get exact details and information out of what these documents entailed and what they stated, the fact that they have been captured and they are also classified is very interesting to say the least. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Balakiya, and we're going to start moving further towards the front lines in the northeast, where these documents will most likely be directly affecting the situation from here forward. And before we get to that front line, we're going to get to the town of Kupiansk, where we saw some Ukrainian units liberating the town about 3 weeks ago, and this footage just came out today. And so I want to share it with y'all, because this shows, once again, while we've seen a couple of videos like this once again shows another perspective of the Ukrainians fighting over Kupiansk, which was quite difficult, because, if any of y'all remember, Kupiansk is on the Oskil River, and so the Ukrainians had to cross the river wherever they were, which is a very daunting task, and to think that they pulled it off successfully says a lot. And so here's the video. Also, it has copyrighted music, so we can't play the music, sadly. But when you see the Ukrainians moving on their way out of this building, I gotta say, the cinematography is top-notch.
It really is. The lighting and everything's pretty good.
Yeah, look at that. And to think that this was actually done during the offensive is probably the most impressive part. We can now see them gathering around outside of a truck, now packing it up. It looks like a Toyota. They're now on their way. And we can now see them moving under some destroyed bridges. And wow, isn't that a beautiful morning or what? I mean, like, that was a really nice looking day. We now see them moving down the streets of Kupiansk. And also getting, wow, was that cool or what? That was a really cool launch. He took the DJI Mavic off on the floor and then flew it out the window. That was actually pretty cool. We now see them moving up along the side of the road. We now see them crossing the road as well. We now see them moving down a fence line as a Ukrainian drone unit observes them from above. We can see that a fire has broken out on one of the buildings behind them. And now we can see that this drone has actually spotted a Russian. Would you look at that? This guy slinked out of that back door, Matthew, like he was some kind of dog that just got scolded. Look at him.
He did.
Yeah. Oh, man. We now see a Ukrainian tank firing down the road as Ukrainian forces continue to move forward, most likely to find the slinking Russian. And now we see the Russians just literally legging it across the street, going full speed. It looks like they may have taken a civilian car. They're now driving through a checkpoint. Oh my god! Oh my god! This is the worst. So what happened here was that the Russians further up the line got freaked out that Ukrainian forces were advancing on them, and so they found a Lada, they hopped in the Lada and started driving off. They drove through another checkpoint, run by their own forces, and the checkpoint started firing at their car. And you can see this right here. Oh my god. Maximum tomfoolery right there. It looks like some of them got wounded. One of them is now running back towards the checkpoint, which now appears to be shelled. Now we can see that they figured out that that was actually not a Ukrainian car or a civilian car. That was actually a car filled with their own soldiers. So now they brought a Tiger armored car to take care of the sleeping Russians and the Russians who've decided to take a lie down. All in all, this looks like a clown show. We now see one of them running across the intersection as they continue to fiddle around at the back of the Tiger. We can now see an APC in the tree line somewhere in the area of Kupiansk, as well as an armored car, and now the artillery is coming down on them too. We can now see that the APC, it looks like the MTLB, is now on fire, and Ukrainian forces are still advancing through the town and doing quite a good job at taking care of the Russians, and it looks like the Russians are also helping them out as well. And I'm glad to know that the Ukrainians always have a friend in the Russian armed forces that always help them to continue their offensive. We can now see a video from a little while ago that we saw from Kupiansk of a woman that is greeting all of the soldiers as they liberate the town. And they're now moving on along. And with that, that's the end of the video, but still an impressive look at the bravery and valor that the Ukrainian forces had pushing through Kupiansk nearly 3 weeks ago, and footage that we have never actually seen. And I've got to say, it's an impressive thing to see Ukrainian forces in action like this. And not only that, it's impressive to see how incompetent the Russians really are. You would have thought, at this point right here, if I can find it again, it's right here. You would have thought that when the Russians got in that car, and I'm assuming, Matthew, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would think that they would have radioed to this checkpoint that, hey, we're in a car, we're going to be driving through your checkpoint. And you would have thought that the Russians wouldn't have fired at a car that was clearly not marked as any side. If it was Ukrainian, it would have had a white cross on it, and it didn't have that on there. So for all the Russians knew, they were firing at a car that was being run by a civilian. And that shows you how trigger-happy they are to try and shoot civilians as well, but it ended up being a little twist of irony. They got their own guys.
Man. That's one thing the Russians have no clue about is communication. They don't communicate about anything.
They don't. It's almost like, it really is like they're living in a past world or something similar to that. They don't think of you doing anything that a modern military would do. Like, it's all just guesswork by the Russians. And I'm sure that the information and documents that were found at Balakiya will show that the communications and the actual knowledge that the Russian command center had was quite low. And I know that that sounds a little pessimistic, but at the same time, look at these soldiers and how incompetent and how poorly they are communicating with each other, and tell me that their headquarters would be better off. I just can't see it. I think that their headquarters is probably as incompetent, if not more incompetent, than these frontline soldiers. Also, real quick,
Enforcer also, I see a ton of people saying they don't have radios, but I've seen before that they have those Battlefield radios, the cheap ones.
Yeah.
So at least they could try to communicate. It may or may not work because it's so cheap, but they can at least try.
They could try, and they just don't. I mean, and of course, that is actually a great point. If they don't have radios, there's no way for them to try. But you would think that they would have done something to identify that car as a Russian car. I mean, obviously not paint a Z on the side, but maybe have someone stick out of the side of the car, waving their hand at the checkpoint like, hey, we're a Russian, just like you guys, we're passing through, don't blast our car. But they didn't. And also, real quick, before we move on to the front, I realized yesterday that we actually missed some day 245 news of the Ukrainians crossing a destroyed railway pontoon bridge over the Outskirts River in the same area as Kupiansk, and I have to show this video. I know that it's a day old at this point, but still, it's a very eerie and crazy video to see, and to think that these people are actually there and crossing this bridge is unbelievable. So here's the video. I'm going to try and get that in HD for y'all, but you can see it's a destroyed railway pontoon bridge right next to the other bridge across the Outskirts River. And it's so eerie looking. It's foggy. It's got like this blue haze over everything. And we can see the Ukrainian soldiers inspecting the remains of the bridge. Of course, destroyed by the Ukrainians or the Russians. We're not entirely sure, actually. We're not sure who destroyed this. We don't know if it was an act of sabotage by Russia as they continued to retreat, or whether the Ukrainians destroyed this in an attempt to, I guess you could say, hinder Russian logistics. And with that, that's the end of the video, and I gotta say, I don't know about y'all, but that just looked eerie. But it's great to know that the Ukrainians did capture the bridge, and that they are now, let me pull out a measuring tape real quick to measure this. From Kupiansk to the nearest part of the front line is 25 miles away. They're now 25 miles away from that eerie bridge, and they're now here at Svatove, which brings us to the news from today again. Starting off, we saw that a Ukrainian drone took a pot shot at some Russian soldiers. Quite a few of them, actually, that were all in a very similar hole. When you hear the music playing, when you see the drone looking down at all of them, and it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Six guys in this one hole? We now see that one of them spotted the drone. There's actually a 7th guy there, and you know, I would play the rest of this video, and I keep on pausing it here intermittently, but I don't think I could show the rest of it for y'all, but I think you'll get the picture that this drone did some pretty decent work and helped to ensure that the Ukrainians will be keeping the upper hand in this area, and Russian squads will be with a few less men than they had at the start. With that, we're now going to be moving on to...
Sure, here's my question. Why would they have so many men crammed in that single hole like that? What is the point?
Well, you see, Ivan, if you have more men in the hole, there is less holes you have to dig.
It's like, dig the hole a little bit bigger. Just don't cram everybody in there like that. They can't even breathe.
I don't even know why. I mean, like, it was so overcrowded. There were literally guys like hanging out on the lip, like right here. Here's a guy who can't even fit in the hole. He's just up there like, hey guys, if anyone wants to trade spots with me, I'd be very happy. I like, what in the world? I don't know. I honestly, and just, I don't know about y'all, but are they arranged like bowling pins? Like, it looks like they're arranged in a little V like bowling pins. I don't know about you, Matthew. Are you seeing that, or is that just me?
It looks like stupidity, if I'm being honest, because why? I'm still baffled. Why would you get in a hole like that? You can't even shoot. They can't even shoot from there. They're all bunched up.
Well, you'll see, Ivan, if you're very smart, you'll get a big hole all together in one, and Ukrainian drone do not see you because there's only one spot of you. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to the next clip of news, but I think y'all all get the idea of what happened to those Russians, and we're now going to be moving to where we see that some new Ukrainian forces are surging forward in the area. And a lot of people are always wondering, and also we'll talk about that here in a second, a lot of people are always wondering, are the Ukrainians getting new forces? And from what we can tell in this video, these are supposedly new Ukrainian forces that are moving forward to the area of Svatove, and so it does appear that their frontline units are getting bolstered with new forces. We don't know where they got these tanks, though. We don't know if they're original Ukrainian tanks, captured Russian ones, or tanks that were provided from an Eastern European country like Poland or the Baltic states, considering that I believe some of those countries still have a supply of Soviet-era tanks. Also, you can see right there one of those S-60s that we talked about the Russians having, and of course, an Ukrainian unit having an S-60 is always a little bit more different than a Russian one. Please allow me to explain. The Russians claimed, before this war, to be the best military on Earth, only second to the United States. They claimed that they were a superpower and they were unstoppable. We now see them pulling out guns that were made in 1950. On the other hand, the Ukrainians have always been viewed and have always made themselves out to be a fledgling nation, one that's pretty new in the world, just finally liberated again, where their people have their own independent country, and they're now trying to get a foothold in the world, and so they have held on to a lot of their older equipment, like this S-60, and for that reason, even though it's the same weapon system, an S-60 looks a lot different in a Ukrainian unit than it does in a Russian unit, just because of the psyche that surrounds the Russians versus the Ukrainians. But here's the video of these brand new tanks coming forward to the front. When you see these Ukrainian soldiers standing by alongside the road, as when you see what appears to be a T-72 BV, I believe? No, a T-64 BV pass by. And then we see, I assume it is a T-72B. I don't think, no. It has to be like a T-72 BV or something similar, because that armor tile layout on the turret's a little bit different. But the wheelbase is a T-72. Well, you now see a couple of more Ukrainian tanks rolling forward. This one is also a T-72 BV, I'm assuming, as well as a third T-72 B3, all racing towards the front lines. And I don't know about you, but it's nice to see that Ukrainian armed forces are getting bolstered a little bit more each and every day with an additional tank, with an additional armored personnel carrier, with an additional armored car. It's just nice to see, and it's good to know that they are never losing the initiative or the steam that was behind their original offensives, and they're still continuing on today. Now, I cannot talk specifically about the exact details that have been occurring in this area and the frontline changes, but one thing I can say is that the Ukrainians are pretty much engaged right now in a battle for Svatove. That's about all I can say, but I can't get into exact details beyond that due to operational security reasons, considering that all of the news I've seen has pretty much come out today. today. Moving on to the next clip, though, we could see that their little offensives are starting to pan out a little bit of extra equipment. As we can see here, they have captured a decent amount of Russian equipment somewhere in the area of Svatove.
Тікали, поставляли, блядь, пулемет з патронами, патронов, ебать. Пиздец.
You can see all kinds of goodies.
Шика, новенький, блядь.
No longer Russian, they'll now be Ukrainian from here forward.
Пиздец. Ебать патронов, ёбаный, сука, хрыч.
A lot of
блядь.
ammo.
Ёбаный насос, блядь. Ебать, сука, тут нахуй пулеметов, блядь.
And a decent amount of machine guns, I believe. Light machine guns, they appear. It looks like they may be PKPs, but with that, it's once again nice to see. The Russians are always losing, and not only just losing ground, but they're losing their stuff. And now the Ukrainians are gaining ground and stuff. It's a win-win for the Ukrainians. With that, we're now going to be moving on into our next clip of news in the northeastern area, where we can see the 4th Brigade, which is one of the brigades that has been heavily involved in the northeastern region, in action on something of a montage. And so, without further ado, here is the 4th Brigade. I cannot play the audio, although it is pretty good sounding. I'll have to mute it due to copyright reasons. We can see them fire an SPG-9, and we can see them firing a symbol of America, the Browning 50 cal machine gun. I gotta tell y'all, I have fired one of these things in real life, and they are incredibly fun. And if you ever get the chance, if you ever go anywhere and someone says, hey, do you want to shoot a Browning 50 cal? And you don't know if they have a tax stamp for it or not, don't worry about that. Just shoot the gun and enjoy it for the meantime. They're really fun. We can now see a video again of them firing off a grenade launcher, and we can actually see it exploding down the way. We've seen this clip before. We can now see, I believe this is actually a clip from the flashback. We can now see an AT weapon being fired down the road, firing off a small infantry mortar. Pretty much this is a montage of everything that the 4th Brigade has been doing in this area over about the past 3 to 2 weeks. And it's an impressive thing to see, and also it's really cool to know that the flashback is in the 4th Brigade as well. We can now see, wait a minute, that is really cool. We can see this PKP machine gun here. And it has I believe, if I'm correct, Matthew, because I'm not a big person on scopes, but I believe that is a reflex scope, or an ACOG well, not an ACOG, it's a reflex if I'm correct.
I believe so, but I'm not really sure. It kind of looks, I'm really kind of unfamiliar with that one.
I hate to tell y'all, I'm not exactly a huge scope and sight nerd. All I know is iron sights, so if you know what that one is in particular, let me know, because I gotta say, that one is very nice. With that, we're gonna let the video continue. We can now see them firing the machine gun. We can now see them firing off an RPG. And firing off an MG3, which is an incredibly nice machine gun. We can see them firing some more mortars. We now see them firing some rounds in a playground with an SPG-9. I gotta say, the kids are gonna love the brand new toy over here. Especially the ringing noise it makes. I think it's a jolly sound. We can now see the flashback firing his AK again. We can now see that they found a picture of someone. Unfortunately, I couldn't say who they were. And with that, that's the end of the video. But a really cool look at a montage of the 4th Brigade and its actions that it's been taking in the Northeast. And of course, the 4th Brigade has been one of the major units helping in this push in the Northeast. And hopefully they'll continue on with the great work they've been doing. Now, to speak in somewhat vague terms, we don't know if the 4th Brigade is directly involved in the offensive around Svatove right now, but they are in the Northeast somewhere, and so I do wish them the best of luck. And with that, we're moving on to our last bit of news here from the northeastern area around Svatove, where we saw that once again, wait a minute, hang on, that was actually the last bit of news right there about the 4th Brigade in action. And so, speaking of the Ukrainians getting some new equipment in this area, like we were earlier, showing off those machine guns and the ammo, the Australians have decided to provide the Ukrainians with something a little bit new. Because you know what's better than captured Russian equipment? Western lended equipment, and that is why the Australians are spray painting up 30 more Bushmasters with Ukrainian flags to send on their way to Ukraine to help out in the war. And I gotta say that the Bushmasters have got to be, next to the MRAPs, some of the coolest looking armored cars that are in Ukraine right now. And I know, of course, that some people are going to say, the coolest doesn't really matter when it comes to armored cars or anything like that, and I gotta agree. But when you're not trying to split hairs, and you're just talking about how cool these things look, this thing is on up there. I don't know if anyone could disagree. Well, I'm sure people can disagree with me, but I don't know. What do you think, Matthew?
How does it look?
Yeah, how does this thing look? Do you think it looks mean? Do you think it looks cool? What do you think about it?
First off, which country is it from again? It's from Australia?
It's from Australia.
The political answer, I love it.
Well,
I don't want to piss off the Aussies. That could be nasty.
I think it's a pretty cool looking armored car, and I can't wait to see these 30 of them that are about to be provided back in Ukraine again, and of course with Ukrainian flags on them, which actually looks pretty mean. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Australia. I had to give a quick shout out to Australia, of course, because we have a massive amount of Australian viewers on this channel. And if you are watching right now as a part of your morning routine, then good morning, and I hope you enjoy that Australia is continuing to provide an incredible amount of support to Ukraine and helping them to continue to push the Russians out and to continue winning the war. With that, we're now going to be moving down to Astrakhan. And while we've always seen a lot of news about conscripts all over the country, we have never gotten any news of the conscripts down here in the Volga Delta. And in Astrakhan, for the first time, we saw that a unit is begging the Russian army for sleeping bags. Here's the video, and it's pretty sad. Just look at these poor guys. They have no kits, they have some AKs, they have no rigs. All they have is some light winter jackets, some pants, and some boots, and some beanies. Not even helmets.
Уважаемый Игорь Юрьевич, мы, личный состав, мобилизованный из Астраханской области, прибыли в город Владикавказ на полигон Тарское. Просим вас оказать содействие в выдаче нам спальных мешков.
They're just all standing around. Oh, Mr. Lunchtime, he's back!
Oh.
He's returned! My boy, Mr. Lunchtime, where have you been? You see, the problem with Mr. Lunchtime was that at the current part of the front line he was at, he ate up all the supplies so badly that the Russian forces collapsed due to starvation in the northeastern region, and so now they've sent him to Astrakhan, and they've had to put together all of the sleeping bags in that entire oblast to give him one big enough to sleep in. So now everyone else in this unit is without sleeping bags, and they're just awkwardly standing around in the middle of a field asking for sleeping bags.
На полигон Тарское. Просим вас оказать содействие в выдаче нам спальных мешков.
I love how they all just, they don't even say anything, they're just staring at the camera. And then Mr. Lunchtime right there to wrap out the video. And so with that, that's the end of that clip. And it once again looks like the Russian conscripts are not doing all too well. I don't know about y'all, but you know, if you're missing sleeping bags, which is a pretty basic piece of kit to get and supply your soldiers with, you might be, I don't know, supply deficient. That's okay, of course, because that helps the Ukrainians to win, but I think that the Russians ought to start realizing that winter's going to be really tough, because if you don't even have a sleeping bag to sleep in, imagine what your normal clothes are going to be like, because you're going to be sleeping in them all day and all night. Although you don't sleep in the day, you sleep in the night. But with that, we're now going to be moving out of Russia and from that short bit of news, and we're now going to be circling back into Ukraine to cover our location unknowns, and we have some pretty wild ones today. And starting off, we have a video of Ukrainian drone and artillery working together, courtesy of Radio Free Europe. But before we get there, I'm seeing a really interesting poll go up, and so I want to address those polls real quick, so that way we can see what everyone's thinking. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so getting into our first poll, the question is, why do you think the Russians left behind all of the secret documents? It looks like 70% said extreme incompetence, 8% said purposeful sabotage to Russia, 15% said misinformation to trap Ukraine, and 7% said none of the above. So overwhelming majority think it's just the incompetence of the orcs. However, I have to disagree a little bit, because I'm very skeptical when things seem too good to be true, and this seems like one of those instances. I hate to be kind of the devil's advocate here, but I think that with Putin's KGB background, that it wouldn't be too far-fetched to say that this is a ploy to misdirect the Ukrainians. They should at least exercise caution when they look at the information, but that's just my opinion. So, Enforcer, what do you think?
Now, I would have to agree with you, Matthew, that caution should always be exercised when looking at documents from the enemy forces, because you can't always be sure whether that's truthful information or whether it's pure deception. Of course, at this point, it won't really matter because the Russians are getting pushed back to even without that information available. But still, it is something to keep in mind. In case if y'all do not know, there was an actual operation, to give a little bit of historical context here, pulled off by the British in the Second World War. And I don't know if you've heard about this one, Matthew, but they found a dead homeless guy on the streets of London. And I guess you could say an MI6 intelligence officer looked at this dead guy, snapped his fingers, and went, aha, that is it right there. We're going to win the war. And so they got this guy. They dressed him all up, they shaved his beard, made him look all clean and trim, and then they put a British Army officer uniform on him. They gave him a suitcase, put it in his hand. I believe they actually glued it to his hand or something similar to that. And inside of it, they put in a whole load of documents saying that the British and the American forces were going to land somewhere in the area of Calais. They dropped this body off right outside of Gibraltar. It then washed ashore in Spain, and then the Spanish found the body. They told the Germans, because at that time the Spanish were actually fascists, their nation was being run by Francisco Franco, and while they weren't Axis aligned and fighting for the Germans in the Second World War, they were still sympathetic to the German cause. They called up the Germans and went, hey, we found a British officer's dead body down here, and it's got classified documents on it. Come down here quick and take a look at them. And then they also notified the British, of course, not to get in any kind of, I guess you could say, problem with them. And they said, hey, we've got a body of a dead British officer down here. Please come pick it up immediately because, we can't guarantee that it won't be looked at by the Germans. So the British mulled around for a couple of days. The German Gestapo made their way down there, looked at the documents, and reported directly back to Hitler. The documents say that the British are landing at Calais. They will land at Calais. And that is part of the reason why, when D-Day was pulled off on June 6, 1944, Hitler refused to move German forces towards the area of the actual beach landings because a lot of his suspicions were confirmed by those documents on that dead body of the homeless guy. And so for that reason, and going off of that single story, and there's a load of stories like that, it is not out of context to say that it's entirely possible that these documents were planted there during the Russian retreat to try and throw off the Ukrainians and make them believe that things are one way when they're really not. So, of course, there is a decent room for truth there. A decent room for deception there. However, on the other hand, we have seen before in this war that a Russian officer was captured about, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks into the war, and I don't think you were on the channel at that time, Matthew. I think you would come on about 2 weeks later. But a Russian officer was captured, and in his backpack, in complete full detail, was the Russian the Russian plan of advance to capture the Novokakhovka Dam. And over the next few days, they followed that plan to a T without even changing it from the plan that had been captured. So, going off of that context, it's entirely possible that these documents are completely authentic, original, and truthful, or they're complete deception. It can really go either way, but based off of the precedent that the Russians have laid out right now, I would say that it was probably sheer incompetence was the reason that they were left behind, although I still strongly encourage that Ukrainian high command officers that look into these documents exercise a large amount of caution with following through on that information, just in case if it is not true and it's some kind of an attempted deception. And so with that, I hope that does address the story the story about the homeless guy fairly well, and also the poll. And with that, we are on to the next poll.
That was pretty interesting. I've never heard that story before in my life. And yes, I think that was actually, what you're just talking about was before I was on the stream. So I don't remember that. But also, I want to mention that if anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the chat and tag @EnforcerMatt. Because right now, I only have about 8 or so live chat questions. So I could use a whole bunch more. So feel free to add yours to the live chat. And moving on to our second poll. It says, why do you think the orcs bunched up in the small dirt pit? It looks like 34% said sheer stupidity. 30% said too lazy to dig a larger hole. 25% said they are cold orcs, need warmth. And 11% said none of the above. Now, I like the third option personally. That's funny. But
Yeah, it's just
I have
funny.
to say, on this one, I would probably go with sheer stupidity. Because, why would you go get in a hole like that with so many people in a war zone where they have drones with bomb lists that they're going to drop on your head? That makes no sense at all. But Enforcer, which one do you think is right?
I would honestly have to say, out of all of them, I once again have to go with sheer Russian incompetence again. Because there's no... Okay, it's not that cold in Ukraine. If we pull up weather in Ukraine, it's 50 degrees Fahrenheit at this very moment, at this very hour, at 5 o'clock in the morning, which is going to be one of the colder times of the day in Ukraine. It will reach a high of 52 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of this day. And for that reason alone, it's not that cold. I mean, like, it's still cold, but it's not as cold as it can get. And I don't see why they'd be crowding together like that for warmth. I think, once again, it was just a bunch of Russians, probably an entire unit, that was just like, oh, look, a perfect hole. And they just got inside of it. And then the drone found them at that exact same time. So that's, of course, my opinion. They could have been gathering for warmth. I'm not incredibly sure. But I still got to say, the drone bomblet looks like it did some pretty decent work on them. And so with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, so that was our last poll for the first question segment. So we're now moving on to our super chats. And up first, we have one from Duncan VR, who puts in a $29 donation, and he has the animal noises again.
Oh.
So here we go. He says, ba ba ba, we Aussies are sending Ukraine 30 more Bushmasters. Meow, meow, ruff, ba ba. I am sending Enforcer a BMW. He'll love it, ba ba, meow. And Matt gets an SU-25 if he says, Baba, meow, chop off Pootler's fingers. Woof, Baba. That got dark right at the end. Wow.
He's sitting there. I will send BMW. Massacre Putin. That was actually a pretty wild one. But I thank you so much for the support, Duncan VR. And also, just in case you all do not know, the context behind sending us a BMW is that I'm not a big fan of BMW, and so that's the whole reason of sending one. And so I thank you so much once again for the support, Duncan VR. It helps us to keep the lights on, it helps us to keep this channel running, and of course, without y'all support, this isn't possible. And so I thank you so much for that once again, and also the crazy, weird, and also funny super chat. It's a pretty funny one, and also you torture Matthew every single time you throw one in, and it's always funny to hear Matthew straining to get out the moos and the boss. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support, and also a complete twist right there at the end.
All right, and moving on to our next one, we have a $25 super chat from Avari Mandubratis, and I know I'm mispronouncing it. I'm so sorry. I do it every single night. But they put in a $25 donation and say, has there been investment in air-to-air uses for drones to take out enemy drones, recon, suicide, loitering, etc., with guns, missiles, or radiation? How effective might such a solution be at protecting designated areas?
And that is a great question, and I thank you so much for the support. Now, I would try and say your name, but I feel like you're going to get it wrong. Like, is it? And if you got a general gist of how it's supposed to sound, Matthew's like Avari.
It's Avari Mandubratis, I think, but I think the last time he said that wasn't quite right, but he's fine with it, so he's being very generous there.
And I thank you so much for bearing with us. We're not good at pronouncing anything. We're from the South, so if that gives you any context, we're not going to be great at pronouncing anything. But moving on from that, that is a great question. So far as we've seen, the best that anyone's tried to do drone-on-drone warfare is to run them into each other and hope that yours doesn't suffer as much damage as the other one and knocks it out of the sky. But we haven't seen any developments beyond that. Of course, one thing I was thinking is that if the Ukrainians got really clever, they could put one of those anti-drone guns onto a drone of their own, and, a very large drone, because those anti-drone guns appear to be heavy and quite cumbersome, and then fly that drone around, and if they do find a Russian drone somehow, target the anti-drone gun at it and force it to land, although I don't think there would be anyone there to grab it. That would still be a pretty interesting one. I don't know about all the evolutions and developments there are to drone-on-drone warfare. We do know that Ukrainian forces have anti-drone guns, and it appears that the Russians, according to one video, may have a couple that are able to be aimed at a drone, turned on, and it disconnects it from its operator and forces it to land right where it was flying. So, based off of that, there is some anti-drone warfare technology out there, but it appears to still be in its infancy and will most likely start to evolve to a high degree probably after this war is over, because I don't think that there would be enough time in the remainder of this war for that technology to be pushed out and also be completely successful. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I thank you for helping this channel to keep on running, because without your support, this isn't possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And I believe the last question of the segment, and thank you so much once again, I believe, hopefully I'm getting it correct, Avari, for your support in helping this channel to keep on running. And so with that, we are on to the final question.
All right, and the final one of this segment goes to Psyops, who puts in a $20 donation. He says, "Welcome to the Psyops stream, now featuring Enforcer and Robomat."
And thank you so much for the support, Psyops. And also, Psyops sent me a message before stream, Matthew, saying that he's going to hijack our stream and he's going to interview us, which I thought was hilarious.
Nice.
So
Nice.
if you want to try and hijack it, I will make an exception for you, and if you want to interview us, please feel free to do so, and I'll try and answer the questions the best I can. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, Psyops, and helping this channel to keep on going. Of course, y'all help us to keep the lights on, help us to keep everything running behind the scenes with the coffee funds, the pizza funds, and everything else, so that way we can keep on getting on here and doing this as a full-time job. Also, once again, not to hype everyone up, but we do have 2 videos planned coming out on October 31st, one from Matthew and one from me, and hopefully y'all will enjoy them a lot. We're going to be putting, actually, we just to be honest, we haven't started on them yet, but we are going to be putting...
Enforcer, why would you say that?
Listen, I've already gotten the idea of what mine is going to be and have already done the research and written some of it down. So my video is in the works. Matthew's is as well. It's just that I don't think either of us have gotten to the part of recording the audio and then starting to piece the video around it, but they will be pretty good, hopefully. And I hope y'all enjoy them as well. Mine's going to be kind of a little bit more demure and Halloween themed, so hopefully y'all enjoy that. It's probably going to be a standalone video, a one of a kind, because, you know, of course, I'm not a demure person. I'm a pretty chipper person. And so with that, we are going to be moving on to the next bit of news. And thank you to... Wait a minute, hang on. Do we have a last question to answer? I forgot if we got to the last question or not, Matthew.
It was the last one for now.
All right. And also, Matthew, real quick, just to let you know, every time you talk, I can tell that you're away from your microphone because it sounds like this, and then you kind of like turn into your microphone and start talking like that. So just letting you know that from here forward, it always sounds like you're coming out of like an abyss to talk to us.
How's that?
That sounds great. That sounds great right there. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into our next segment of news, which will include our location unknowns. And that clip I was just talking about a little while ago, courtesy, of course, of Radio Free Europe, that showed us how a Ukrainian mortar and drone team have been operating in unison in the Donetsk region. And so with that, here's the video.
Наступну давай. Бегом, давай дві, бегом.
Ебалый. Дымить, да, дымить. Фокус, да, блядь.
We now see a little Mavic up there in the sky.
Yeah, БК пішло, блядь.
Isn't that insane? I'm going to have to pause this here real quick, because isn't that unbelievable? The artillery never in history before, unless if you're talking about direct fire artillery from the late 1800s and further beyond that in history, never before has modern artillery been able to see exactly what they're firing at. Never. And now with these drones, a mortar crew on the ground, which would usually get their information of how accurate they are from a spotter unit miles ahead of them, is now able to see exactly where their rounds are landing in real time from a drone. It's like to think about that, we are living in the future right now. And of course that sounds really cheesy, but we are. Like, think about that. If you are an infantryman, and you have a drone like this, you could be on the battlefield, and usually, if you turned a corner in urban fighting, you would just have to go, hopefully there's not anyone around this corner, maybe we can get across the street. Now with a drone, you can sit there, fly it over there onto that street and go, there's 3 guys over there, and they're exactly in this building right there. Let's hit it with artillery. And it's unbelievable to think that that's what war has turned into. Modern technology has made it a lot more dangerous in some ways and a lot safer for infantry and artillery to operate. It just depends on who has more drones compared to the other side. But with that, we're going to let this video continue.
Enforcer, real quick, a question. Had they been using drones like this prior to the February invasion, or is this a new thing they just came up with?
This is something that the Ukrainians have been doing lightly, from what we could tell, before the 2022 invasion. It seems like it was something that was starting to come to life, in a way. I guess you could say, like, the idea of the technology being used like this. And then, honestly, Matthew, now that you asked that question, I think that would be an amazing video for me to do, is the history of drones and warfare. You know, all the way from the original, I guess you could say, the drones that we think of, like the Predator, the Reaper, and those kinds of larger drones, and how they've evolved into becoming smaller, cheaper, and much easier to use drones that the common infantryman can use with little to no experience on the system. I think that would be a great video, because really, the first time that we ever saw drones being used to extremely effective measures would have been in the Nagorno-Karabakh war in between Armenia and Azerbaijan just about 2 years ago in 2020. There we saw that drones could be used just like this incredibly well, and from then on, we've seen that larger nations in the world like the United States and Russia and China, although Russia has now been knocked out completely of even being called a larger country, we've seen that the United States and the Chinese have been heavily investing into, I guess you could say, man-portable drones like DJI Mavic size and similar. And so with that, we're going to let this video continue.
Назаді і більш в безопасності.
Він кардинально міняє насправді лінію, тому що за рахунок великої дистанції висоти ми бачимо противника і його майбутні рухи. Тобто, куди машина їхня, куди їде їхня машина, до якої посадки, кількість піхоти в посадці можемо замітити. Тобто він дійсно допомагає і міняє лінію.
Якби не було його, то як би тоді?
О, це гарне питання. Радіємо, що він у нас є зараз.
We now see one of their larger drones lifting off the sky, and I gotta say, that's quite a nice one.
Міномет координуємо з нашого БПЛА, з Матрикса. Позиція доповідає, що бачить роботу міномета, бо, наприклад, що піхота там щось підвозить, вона зразу нам передає координати.
А що це за міномет?
89. Вот это ставлю.
А в мирному житті ким були?
Менеджер з продажі страхування життя.
Як символічно у вас зараз робота склалася в армії.
Ну так співпало, що треба всіх застрахувати.
Ні, на білу лінію постав. До 90 було. Вистав рівно.
Багато з нього вистрілів можна зробити. Тому що радянські там до 20 тисяч вистрілів можна зробити, цього безліч. Ну, але в загальному може бути таке, що він може 2 рази стрілити, а може бути і 50-60 тисяч.
Це італійський міномет, гарний, його дистанція 9, там 3,5 кілометри ми можемо доставати. Більш точніше, як попередні судепівські варіанти. Ну, ним просто легше навіть бусоль виставляти. Ми завжди надіємося.
Wait a minute, hang on, I gotta go back to that. Ukrainian troops say Russian forces may be less motivated than they are. You know, I couldn't have come up with a more obvious statement if I wanted to.
And who put the statement out?
Radio Free Europe, and of course, Radio Free Europe does great reporting. But I feel like at this point, this is just an obvious statement. Like, I don't know why that's something that's like they say that Russian forces could be demoralized. Like, it's like they are. Like, we see that every day at this point. But we're gonna let the video continue. And of course, we're not dissing on Radio Free Europe. I was just laughing at how this statement, we've been saying this for like months, and everyone's been saying this for months, including Radio Free Europe, and then this was said like it was kind of like a new revelation, like, oh, they're less, they have less morale than us. But with that, we're gonna let the video continue.
Ми завжди надіємося, що прийдуть якісь демотивовані зразу росіяни, які зрозуміють, що вони приїхали на нашу землю, що їм тут нема що робити. Але завжди ми стикаємося з тим, що вони пускають піхоту як м'ясо. У нас на полі лежить безліч російських солдат, які просто там лежать і їх ніхто не забирає.
And with that, that's the end of the video. Of course, credit to Radio Free Europe that provided it, and a very interesting look at how drones are changing the way that infantry mortars will operate from here forward. And remember this, Ukraine is an incredible military at this point, Western trained and also Western armed. Some of the best technology that there is out there in the world compared to most other nations. But think about it. The United States is not sending all of the most advanced equipment, and a lot of Western countries are not sending the very pinnacle of the equipment that we have in our stores and inventory. Imagine what a country like the United Kingdom, France, Germany, or the United States could do if they got engaged in a war like this. Imagine the extra capabilities and technology that we would see in a war that encompassed the United States now versus Russia or a similar nation. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into the next clip where we can see that Ukrainian Chechens, these are not Kadyrovite Chechens, these are actually Ukrainian Chechens firing at the Russians. We haven't seen a video from them in ages, but it's great to see that they're back on the front lines and in action again, according to this video. So real quick, we're going to let this intro play, and then we'll unmute it to see if there's any music. And let's see, this says, let's see, it says, oh man, Guipol, maybe. Let me check that real quick. Let me go to Google Maps and go to Guipol real quick. So, let's see, where's Guipol? Where's Guipol? Come on. Come on. Hang on, let me go to my actual front line on here and let me find it because, alright. It's Guipol. Okay, so we actually have a location for that one. We're going to change it real quick. So we're going to take that one. Sorry, everyone. I actually didn't realize that I could read Ukrainian a little bit until I got to right there. And so now I actually realize that there's a location tacked down to that one. And so this actually did occur on the southern front. One of the few instances of news that we've gotten from the southern front. And so without further ado, here is the Ukrainian Chechen battalion at work.
Я видимость.
Also, real quick, I hate to pause the video again so quickly, but some people are saying that it starts with a G, and if we look at the map at Guipol down here, it actually starts with a G in Ukrainian, I guess you could say, lettering. It says Guilopol, or something similar to that. So while it's an H in English, it's apparently a G in Ukrainian. So we'll have to remember that going forward, and we'll have to ask next time Starsky's around if it's pronounced Guilopol or Guilopol, because now I'm interested. But here's the video.
Да. Так, видно нормально?
We now see the Chechens getting out of the truck.
Давай крупиву, забивай демо. Щоб дерево ми не зацепили. Дивися, тут дерево. Давай, Артур, дивись, як ясно. Давай, планшет. На заднем сиденье. Давай, планшет. Бек, заходи. Бек, заходи, де. Координати наші. Бек, координати. Спригуй. Сем. Жди.
You now see them unloading their equipment from the back of the truck. It also appears to be some kind of a Toyota Technical with a Mark 19. Oh my god! This thing got leveled up quickly. I was like, oh, it's just a Technical. No, it's a grenade launching Technical.
How did they have it mounted?
I don't even know. It's honestly nuts.
It's like floating into the air.
And I love how this guy's sitting, man. And honestly, it looks like he's sitting back in a lazy boy gaming chair or something.
Yes.
Off the Mark 19.
It's a pretty solid looking setup, actually.
This guy is actually very comfortable looking, and I'm sure that he really enjoys firing this Mark 19 for that reason. We now see them switch places because this man also wants to fire the Mark 19 as well. And we can now see him firing the grenade launcher as well. Everyone gets to have a little bit of fun on the family Mark 19. We now see him getting up as well. Now we see him grab the camera, get out of the truck, and the video ends right there. But quite an interesting video, and it's really cool to see that the Ukrainian Chechens are on the southern front and also firing a grenade launcher at the Russians, hopefully hitting them effectively, but we didn't get to see where those rounds landed, so we're not entirely sure. All we can do is hope. With that, we're moving on into the next location unknown news bit, where we saw a very long video, and a very cool one, a 5-minute long video of a Ukrainian Su-25 taking to the skies and hitting the Russians with its unguided rockets. And so, here's the video. And we have to mute the music, but we see them going through a loading montage as well. A lot shorter than the Russians, though. The Russians would have made you go through the whole loading montage, the pre-flight checklist, the startup checklist, the taxi, the takeoff. The Ukrainians just skipped all that. They just showed you, like, some flares being loaded, a rocket being loaded, and we're already into the action. We can now see this Su-25 flying over the skies. We can see it continuing to fly over, of course, with a wingman. And it's always cool to see these Ukrainian Su-25s flying over. And you can see a little hint of their grayish color scheme that they have on these Su-25s. There's a beautiful camouflage. When you see them flying over some lakes, popping some flares. Really nice little flight here. Very beautiful scenery as well. And we can actually see, crazily enough, Matthew, this is rare. There's a third Ukrainian Su-25 further up in the formation.
Oh, yeah, I kind of do see it.
Yeah, very rare. We usually only see Su-25s on both sides flying in pairs. We usually don't see them flying in trios. And this is truly treetop level flying. Look at how close that is. It's like 15 feet below the Su-25. That's pretty impressive. We see them continuing to fly. And man, I gotta say, I would love to fly one of these. It just looks nice. You know, flying planes just looks nice in general. It's just that, I mean, I don't know if y'all have ever looked into it, but it is difficult to become a pilot of any kind. Like, it's like, geez, like, and also, you can't really, well, I can't become a pilot due to certain reasons. I will not say why, but it's really cool to be a pilot. I wish I could fly a plane. Probably won't ever be able to, but isn't that just cool? And it looks really nice. Now, I believe at a point, Matthew, if you want to share a little bit with everyone here, I believe at one point you were interested in becoming a pilot. I believe an airline pilot.
Me?
Yeah, I think I remember you talking about, like, Delta or something like that years ago.
Oh yeah, probably a long time ago, but I was never really serious about it.
Oh man, I was hoping you had had on to that, but all right. We now see them flying over some beautiful green fields. We don't know what's growing down there, but it looks quite healthy. Now they're flying over the golden fields of grain, taking a nice little left turn. Tothanator said bad eyeballs. No, it actually has something to do with my spine. Not to get into a lot of details, but it's my spine. So I'm sure that limits it down to a few things, but we can now see the aircraft continuing to fly over the tree line. It looks like it's lost its wingman. Actually, it looks like we're changing in between the footage of two Su-25s. This one has the number 45 on the front of it. The other one, I believe, has 16. Also, JD Macca said spine. For some reason, I don't know why, but it feels weird to say spine. So I always just find it like a little bit comical and also, for some reason, easier to pronounce spine. But anyways, we can see the Su-25s all firing off their rockets right here. A little bit of a montage of them all firing off their rockets in the exact same spot. Gosh, look at those! That was massive! Those are some huge rockets! Look at that. Dang. Wow. Like, what is that? Like 240 millimeters? We now see them all taking a hard right bank. They are going fast at this point. I don't know if they were flying at a lower throttle earlier on, but right now it looks like they are just pushing these things to the max. We can even see the camera frame shaking a little bit as they are flying over the fields now. A little bit higher up than before. And with that, the video ends there, but it's incredibly impressive to see these Ukrainian Su-25s in flight and still hitting the Russians. The Ukrainian Air Force was never destroyed, and it never gave up, and it's very nice to see that it continues to fly to this day. With that, we're going to be moving on into the next clip of Location Unknown News, where we can see some Ukrainian border guards at work. The border guards are very, I guess you could say, focused on their job. They don't like people entering Ukraine that have not had their papers and visas checked. And we can see right here that this Russian, apparently a Russian freeloader, is taking a vacation on Ukrainian soil without their papers being checked, and the Ukrainian border guards take great offense to this. They will now drop a door knocker onto the top of this armored personnel carrier to let them know that their papers are about to be checked. The Russians have now been notified that their papers will be checked, and it appears that the border guards have unfortunately caused a small fire in the engine bay. We have not seen the Russians get out of the car yet. Well, the APC, more like it. Kind of weird that they took a vacation in a military vehicle. I don't know about you, Matthew, but I've never done that. So we can see the border guards drop a second door knocker on the top of the APC, once again to remind them that they have not been able to see their visas yet. We now see the drone spinning around and flying off to go get another Russian freeloader that has not had their papers checked and their visas made sure that they're all nice and tidy and in order. We can now see them moving on to another vehicle. Once again, brought by the Russian vacation goers, and I don't think the border guards are really all too happy with these guys at this point. Massive group, and they didn't check with the border customs at all. They are now going to repossess this car. The border guards of Ukraine have a very unique way of repossessing vehicles. They usually don't bring them to an impound lot. They just allow them to sink into the grounds of Ukraine and become a permanent land feature. And with that last bomblet, it appears that entry has been denied and they've now been sent somewhere other than Ukraine. We don't really know where. With that, that's the end of that video, and we're now going to be moving on into the next, but it's great to see that the Ukrainian border guards are once again making sure that the Russian armed forces do not cross the borders freely. With that, we can see a Russian BMP-3 being destroyed by a Stugna, and here's the video. Also, we can hear the Chad music playing in the background, a permanent feature of a lot of these videos, but we can see the BMP-3 right there, and we see this drone watching on with great intent as we now see the Stugna launcher firing off its missile. It's now hit the BMP-3, and a large billow of white smoke comes out of the tree line, showing us that that BMP-3 was destroyed. We now see some artillery hitting some Russian positions, and it appears that it did quite an effective job. We now see more artillery landing in the area, and we can also see that according to the Ukrainian armed forces, they don't call the Russians Russians, they call them Orkiv, which means orc in Ukrainian. It is an official term. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainians were able to destroy that BMP-3 and also get a couple of bonus points. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see something that is quite rare. In fact, this may be the first time we've seen it in the war. In case if y'all don't know, firing artillery is a pretty strenuous and stressful process, not for the crew alone, but for the piece as well. And one thing that a lot of people do not know is that eventually, let me pull this up, 16-inch guns. We'll take a look at these guns, and while these aren't the ones we're about to be looking at on video, these prove an important point. These are 16-inch guns on board a U.S. ship. I'm not sure if this is a heavy cruiser or a battleship. I don't know the exact class of ship, but one thing that I can tell you is that these guns, while massive, while powerful and heavy-hitting, they can only be fired so many times before their barrels get worn out. Did you know that, Matthew?
I did not, actually.
These barrels can only fire a very small amount of rounds before they've been completely worn out. The steel that they're made of is pretty much just sent through the ringer, and you can't fire these things anymore without the chance of them actually just exploding from the pressure of firing another round. And so at some point, these guns have to be taken off the ship, melted back down, although sometimes they're not, or they have to get an incredibly, well, not incredibly, a brand new barrel, or a brand new, I guess you could say, cannon to replace these. And so this does happen. And sometimes they recycle these in a way, or they get them retreated to where they're able to sustain a whole other life cycle of rounds. And when they do that, that's called reboring. If you do not rebore larger artillery pieces that are, I guess you could say, on up there in size, I guess you could say beyond about 80 to 90 millimeters in size, this can happen. And we can see that this happened on a Ukrainian D-20 just a while ago. Apparently, no crew members suffered injury, but we can see what happens when a barrel is not rebored and it is put through the ringer to the point that it reaches its breaking point. This is what a D-20 barrel looks like when it has reached the end of its lifespan. And so with that, that's the end of that video, and it's lucky to hear that the Ukrainian artillerists that were operating this piece didn't suffer any injuries, and it's very interesting to see that this cannon has finally reached the end of its lifespan, and you can actually see. Now, a quick interesting question, and I don't know the exact number on this. How many rounds can a 16-inch gun fire? And let's see what it can fire before it reaches the end of its lifespan. It's probably something around 200 rounds, most likely, but I want to see if we can actually find a number for that, now that I brought that up and told you all that little story. So, service history, super heavy, yeah, well, we're looking for something else. Dagnabbit, I don't think we'll be able to find it. Well, actually, I do know this. I can tell you all this. In case of y'all haven't heard of the Dora Supergun, not Dora Super Babies, the Dora Super Gun, or the Schwer Gustav, which is the one I'm talking about. which is also one of them was called
Oh, yes, I've seen that somewhere. I can't remember where I saw it, but that looks familiar.
This massive behemoth was used by the Nazi Germans during the siege of Sevastopol, believe it or not. And funnily enough, this gun, while being 500 millimeters in size and a heavy hitter, could only fire about 50 rounds before the barrel could not fire another shot, or it would suffer overpressure. And so this is something that you have to deal with on larger artillery pieces, even the smaller ones, in context like this D20, before they suffer from an overpressure. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on into the next clip of Location Unknown News, where we can see that a Ukrainian sniper did a little bit of work today. We now see them firing at the Russians. And taking a couple of them down, it appears. And with that, that is the end of the video, and it's very interesting to see that this sniper, and once again, it's very weird to see that at this point in the war, we're now finally seeing snipers in action, are doing such a good job at taking out the Russians. I've got to say, quite a good job, and keep it up. Also, we finally got an answer from Try and Take Alaska, which is a very good username, who said that a 16-inch gun can fire 290 rounds before it has to be rebored, or I believe someone else said relined. I'm not sure if relining or reboring is the exact term. I have heard one person in my reenacting group that was kind of designated as our expert on larger cannons, and they said that it was reboring, but it may also be relining. I'm not entirely sure. But with that, that's the end of that video, and once again, very impressive to see. Now, of course, while we were talking about a much larger artillery piece like a 16-inch gun, a D20 can probably fire over 1,000 rounds before it has to be relined or rebored. So make sure to keep that in mind, but I was just using the larger artillery pieces as an example of that because, you know, why not go for a very big and interesting gun when talking about that? And so with that, we are on to our final bit of Location Unknown News, and it's now time for the Russian casualty statistics. Oh, buddy. 500 soldiers nearly lost in a day. I don't know, but that doesn't sound good. What do you think, Matthew? Do you think that's good?
I mean, that's good for Ukraine.
Well, it's good for Ukraine, but I don't think that's good for Putin. Like, how in the world can you continue?
Who cares about
500
him?
men? You know, that's just a bizarre, really, when you think about it. Also, 17 tanks were lost today. That's almost 2 entire BTGs worth of tanks were destroyed. We saw 30 armored personnel carriers. That's an entire BTG worth of armored personnel carriers that was lost today. 12 artillery pieces, 2 MLRSs, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, no new planes, no new helicopters, no new boats, but they shot down 7 more drones. They destroyed 22 more supply trucks, so now we're going over 100% of the pre-war supply trucks being destroyed, and we can see that they did not shoot down any new cruise missiles or destroy any new special equipment vehicles. But they are getting very close at this point. It's probably only 2 days away that the Russians will finally have reached 70,000 soldiers killed in this war, and what have they gained? They have gained nothing, and as the war has gone on, they have started to lose almost everything that they achieved in the opening months, which tells you how poorly they are off. And it also states that this war cannot go on forever, and I say this forever, but now it's just a question of how much longer can this war last before it finally comes to an end. And so with that, we're now going to be moving down the line and out of the location unknowns and into the area around Bakhmut and Soledar. But before we get here and watch this Russian recon unit get obliterated and turned into ice, I've seen that a very interesting poll has been put up about... It looks like a lot of people are actually interested in becoming a fighter pilot. And so, with that, Matthew, guide us through that poll real quick.
All right, so before that poll, we did have one more, and the first one said, have Ukraine pioneered the use of drones that might soon replace recon scouts in warfare? Very interesting question, and it looks like 60% said yes, I believe it will, 10% said not sure, and 30% said no, it will not replace completely. Now, for me, I don't think it'll replace completely, but I think it will definitely play a much larger part in future warfare, and I think the Ukrainians are the first to pioneer it. So that's something that they've done all on their own. At least that's my understanding, but Enforcer, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're not wrong. The Ukrainians are the first ones to implement it on a large scale in a large conventional war. The first nations to do it in an actual war at all, on an actual fieldable scale, would have been the Nagorno-Karabakh war in between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but those both are not... they're not even really regional powers. They're more so of... I don't even know what we would categorize those two countries as, but they're below a regional power. So with that in mind, this is the first time that we've seen a regional power and a second regional power like Ukraine get into a conflict with each other in field drones on a large scale. And so for that reason, I believe that drones will be important in wars going forward. They're not going to replace anything, but they are certainly going to enhance the abilities of a lot of these units like artillerists and infantry that will now have readily available in on-demand reconnaissance whenever they need it without the need necessarily for recon units. That's something else that I was thinking about that's quite interesting. Recon units are most likely going to start taking a smaller and smaller role in terms of their, I guess you could say, importance on the field, because what a recon unit could do before can be done by a standard infantry unit and a couple of drones. Now they can go forward with these drones and scout miles ahead of their main force without the need of putting a company of men in a recon unit on the line to go find the enemy. That's actually something that is pretty interesting to me, and also I think that's really cool, and I wonder how this is going to change war. Now, in case y'all don't know, war is already changing, at least in terms of doctrine in the West right now. The British claimed a while ago, although it appears that they may have reversed this decision, that they would be retiring their entire main battle tank force in the future, and the Marine Corps in the United States has already gotten rid of all of their M1A1 Abrams that they had in service, which means that the Marine Corps is entirely without tanks at this point. And so we do see that war is changing in that regard, and it appears that Western doctrine is starting to see tanks as, I suppose, obsolete. You know, and of course that's a discussion that's been had a lot in this war, and, you know, I've heard a lot of arguments at this point. I have seen some videos where people are like, tanks are not obsolete, it's just the way the Russians are using them that has made them obsolete. But at the same time, Western doctrine appears to be moving in the direction even before this war that they are becoming obsolete, and that war will be having changes. And those changes might be coming around because through war games, and when I say war games, don't think of anything like Call of Duty or Battlefield. I'm talking about where you lay out a massive sheet on the ground in something like a gym-sized room, and you play out these advanced simulations pretty much in between two sides to see what kind of technology can work and how it can change war. And that's also an interesting video in its own right, because that was where the Germans actually developed the Blitzkrieg, was through playing war games in the pre-war period, well, like really the interwar period in between World War I and World War II. But moving beyond that, I do think that drones will be making a massive change in war, and that change will be permanent. And I think that drones right now, in the way they're being used, are in their infancy, and we'll see them get refined and perfected probably over the next decade into something that will become a recognizable feature of the battlefield. And so with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and the second one said, would you want to be a fighter pilot? It looks like 46% said yes, it is so cool. 14% said yes, but it's too much training. 15% said no, too dangerous, and 25% said no, I just don't want to. So, interesting. 25% don't want anything to do with it. But yes, I would tend to agree with the 46% that said yes, it is so cool. But I will say at the same time, it is a whole bunch of training. Like, for example, one part of it that I've always been like curious how difficult it is the SEER training part of becoming a fighter pilot, at least in the United States. It seems like that might be a little bit, you know, tough. That seems to weed a lot of people out from what I've heard. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I think that it would be really cool to be a fighter pilot. Who wouldn't want to be a fighter pilot? I just think it's neat. Of course, you know, like getting the idea of flying a jet at hundreds of miles per hour over Mach sometimes, although that's rare. 30,000 feet in the air, or like we see in a lot of these videos, right above the tree line. It just seems thrilling. It seems really fun. And of course, it's probably incredibly stressful and obviously dangerous as well, but that doesn't get rid of the thrill of the whole thing. It still looks really neat. And so I would love to become a fighter pilot. Also, I have seen some people like, hey, you know, like I've seen like one or two. I don't know if you saw it. But someone said that war games did not happen. And I think I'm going to have to key y'all in on something new, actually. This is the very beginning of war games that I'm talking about. Not the war games that a lot of people will think of today, but this is called a Kriegspiel. And Kriegspiel is the concept of using war games to learn about how units can operate in the field. This was originally pioneered by the Prussians in the 19th century, which gives it the name Kriegspiel, which means in German, war game. That's where war games come from. And if you've ever seen it, this is kind of a semblance, in a way, a modern semblance, more so for entertainment now, of what a Kriegspiel looks like. Back in the day, and this is what gave the Prussians a leading edge, and also is a part of the whole entire idea that the Prussians were some kind of an excellent, well-disciplined fighting force in the 1800s, was that their officers would constantly work on playing these Kriegspiels out and seeing how they could further enhance their tactics against their, I guess you could say, rivals and opponents like the French, to see how they could defeat them decisively on the field without ever having to shed a drop of blood and get experience through the mistakes that could cost people hundreds of lives. It's a very interesting thing, and also, in case if y'all don't know, Kriegspiels and the concept of war games like this were used to deter and actually find out how U-boats were destroying massive amounts of British shipping in the Second World War in between the United States and Britain. Did you know that, Matthew?
Definitely didn't know that.
It's actually a really cool story, and I'll try and make it as short as possible. German submarines were destroying British shipping by the hundreds of thousands of tons a month. It was getting to an unbelievable amount, and the British were getting choked to death by this lack of supplies because of the U-boats destroying all of their ships. And so they set out a small team of men and gave them these several gymnasium-sized rooms where they could lay out these massive naval simulations of convoys and figure out, based off of these games, how the Germans were destroying these ships. Over a load of testing and gaming, they figured out that the best way, probably the only way that the Germans ended up being so successful, is that the Germans weren't attacking the convoys from afar, they were actually inside the convoys. And so their submarines were sitting inside the whole convoy. The destroyers and their anti-submarine crews were looking outwards outside of the convoy and into the open sea, and they weren't looking into the middle of the convoy. So they found this out, they told the Royal Navy, stop looking outwards towards the sea for the submarines, start looking inwards towards the merchant ship themselves, and start looking for conning towers and periscopes peeking above the water, and lo and behold, that's what the Germans had been doing the whole entire time, and they discovered it off of playing a war game. And that's what turned the tide of the war for the British in the North Atlantic in terms of the U-boat war, is that they were able to now find these U-boats in the middle of the convoy and destroy them efficiently, and they were able to curtail a massive load of shipping and cargo that was being destroyed at sea. And so with that, I hope y'all enjoyed that little short story, and also it adds a lot of credibility to the story about war games and how they've helped so much in developing doctrine and tactics in the future, and maybe the reason why we see that Western militaries are abandoning tanks as we speak. But with that, now that we've covered those polls, and I've also given another rabbit hole history story, it's now time to hear some questions. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and moving back into our super chats, up first, we have an $80 donation from Mark, Slav Ukraine, who says, Enforcer Matt, happy birthday. And also, Mark, thank you very much. It's still not my birthday, but thank you. He says, as well as Operation Mincemeat, there was a sad one in Operation Market Garden, in which the Germans captured all the Allied drop plans, so slaughtered the paras. Deception is key. Kherson was a good example for the Kharkiv offensive.
And thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Mark. It helps this channel keep on running, helps us to keep the lights on, and without it, this wouldn't be possible. And so, off the bat, I got to thank you so much once again for helping us out so much. Now, to address that is a great story, Mark. Operation Market Garden was the final failure of the Allies in the Second World War, and of course, it had to be headed by none other than General Montgomery, which was hated by everyone at that point, so it didn't really make him look a lot better. But anyways, moving on beyond that, that is true. Plans falling into the hands, and that's also a great counter to the story of the dead man being dropped off the coast of Spain, well, the homeless guy being dropped off the coast of Spain. In that instance, actual plans were captured that led to the demise of those. I believe it was the first para in Arma, not Arma, Arnhem, which for some reason I said Arma, which is an actual game. But anyways, moving on from that, that did lead to their demise, and that is another counter, a historical precedent, where plans that were accurate fell into the enemy hands and then ended up leading to the defeat of their forces. And so I would have to agree with you that deception is key, and hopefully this is not a deception by the Russians, and these plans were captured intact and were authentic, much like they were in Operation Market Garden, although that was to the Allies' detriment. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the massive amount of support, Mark, and also providing us with an interesting little tidbit of historical precedent there as well. And I love to see that every once in a while, people do use historical precedent to argue something. I think that was a great example of it, and one I didn't think of earlier when I was talking about my arguments as to why it could be deception or why it couldn't be. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the great support, Mark, and helping this channel to keep on running thanks to you. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have a $50 super chat from Magic Sky Girl, who says, "Hey there, Enforcers. This is your housewarming gift. Spend it in good health." And I feel like the house is getting a lot warmer now.
And thank you so much for the support. And something funny, speaking of housewarming, is that in my little bedroom, I don't know if it's little or not. It feels a little, sometimes it feels big, others, I don't know. Anyways, in my bedroom, I have the space heater still. I actually upgraded my space heater and replaced it with the smaller one, and I got the larger one now. So y'all may hear that button turning on and off. I don't think y'all heard it all stream yet, but when I turn this thing on, this whole room turns into a sauna, and it takes like 20 to 30 minutes in opening up the door to this thing to get it cool again. But I do thank you so much for the housewarming gift. I feel like this room could get a little cooler at times, or a little bit warmer, but I still thank you so much nonetheless, Magic Sky Girl, for supporting this channel and helping us to keep running. Of course, y'all help us massively. In fact, y'all are the only way we keep ourselves running behind the scenes, keeping the lights on, and making sure that we have something to eat, so that way we don't go starving, and a place to sleep, and so that way we can keep this thing going. And so thank you so much once again, Magic Sky Girl, for the impressive amount of support. It helps us out greatly, and without y'all, this stream wouldn't be possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
Right, and next up, we have a $50 super chat from Alexander, who does not put in a comment. But Alexander, I think that is your first time supporting us, so thank you so very much for the support. And sadly, I wish you left a comment. I would like to know why you left us support, but thank you so much.
And thank you so much for the support as well, Alexander. I saw it come in and had a little cool, like a little emoji thing to it. It was like a Shiba Inu on top of a birthday cake, I think, if I'm correct.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it was. And I thank you so much for the little neat, cool little thing. I saw it there for a second. And also the support, because it helps us to keep this thing running, helps us to keep the lights on. And of course, it doesn't just help us to keep the lights on, it helps us to get ready to go to law school. And so with that, I thank you so much for helping us to keep this channel running and helping us to keep everything going in the future. And hopefully everyone will be around for when I run for president in 2040, because that's still a thing, and while I don't talk about it a lot, I still have that plan. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for your kind support. And while you didn't leave a comment, the support does say a lot. It says that you enjoyed this channel and wanted to keep on running, and for that, I thank you. And with that, I believe that is the last question of the segment, if I'm correct, Matthew.
I think... I have a feeling like maybe we had one more to go. I'm not really sure.
We covered Mark, we covered Magic Sky Girl, and we covered Alexander. So those were the three.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, all right. So with that, we are now going to be moving on into our final segment of news for the night. And I've actually noticed that due to rabbit holes, polls, and question segments, we are starting to run a little overtime. It's now I believe 11:40 Eastern time, which is usually when we begin to the speech from President Zelenskyy. So with that, we're going to be starting to cut down the I guess you could say, descriptions of some of these clips and getting through this a little bit quicker. But moving on down into the Bakhmut area, we can see that a Russian recon unit got hit today by some pretty effective artillery. We can see the recon group down here in this tree line. They're now moving. We can see one Russian doing some push-ups. We can now see them laying down on a tree line and firing. And we can now see them moving in a very disorganized formation. The artillery is now coming down on top of them. And we can see that it looks like they didn't really fare all too well. Yeah, I would have to say the artillery got them pretty good. We now see one of their BMP-2s racing down the line. We can see that's not really in good condition either. And we can now see that it's been destroyed somewhere in between the first clip and the last one. We now see what appears to be a drunk Russian walking around some small paths. And now he's falling. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh lord. With that, that's the end of the video, and it looks like that recon soldier was taken out by a little bit too much to drink. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next clip of news in the Bakhmut area, where you can see some Russians being put out of the job, or as they say in Britain, being made redundant. Here's the video. That's got music. When you see the drone moving around. When you see that they found some Russians in this tree line, that's never a good sign. For the Russians at least, but for the Ukrainians it is. When you see them hanging out, enjoying the sign of this road, they're looking down in the grass and going, "Hey Ivan, this is some nice grass." And the bomblet falls right beside him. And it appears that they're largely unfazed, and I think that they might be unfazed because, like the caption said, they may be in bad shape. And based off of what we've seen in this area, the Russian forces are in bad shape. They have been pushed back from Bakhmut a little, and we haven't gotten exact information to update the front lines yet, but it appears that the Ukrainians are now starting to turn the tide in their favor in Bakhmut as well. It's no longer a stalemate, they are now on having the upper hand. Moving on behind the lines into the Donetsk region and into Shakhtarsk, we saw a pretty sizable fire occur at a rail yard. It's so nice to see the morning sunrise at 12 o'clock at night. Oh my,
Dang,
that's not
a serious fire.
That's a little bit of a fire. Quick, everyone, pull out the hot dogs. But with that, that's the end of the video. And you can see that in the town of Shakhtarsk, it appears that they're going to be staying warm pretty well, but for quite a short while as well. But it's still nice to see that the Ukrainians are ensuring that Russian supplies will not make it to the front lines anymore. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the area of Shakhtarsk and on towards the front lines near Pisky, where we saw that some artillery landed nearby some Ukrainian troops. When you see the Ukrainian troops sitting in this trench. And that was quite close. It appears to have thrown around a lot of their, I guess you could say, stuff. Pots, pans, equipment. But it sounds like they're okay.
Тоже вухо придзвонила, дзвони, сиди. Я би казав туди зранку. Дімон, тільки тут сиди, будь собі добре. Ага, така то хуйня. Нездорова.
We now see the Ukrainian just sitting around after the artillery barrage, but he looks like he's actually well put together. He didn't look that freaked out, although that round landed quite close to him. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainians still have morale, even when they're right under artillery fire, literally under it. With that, we're now going to be moving behind the lines a little bit and towards the town of Andriivka, where we saw that a Ukrainian S-300 engaged some Russian air forces over the area today. And so here's the video of one of Ukraine's S-300s taking out a Russian target. When you see the S-300 launched right there, and now taking its nice little short flight towards the Russian target. You see it's still traveling on its way out into the horizon, and we didn't get to see it hit the target, but hopefully it did. Of course, Ukrainians have a small number of S-300s, but luckily enough at the beginning of the war, when the strikes occurred on their, I guess you could say, air defenses, the Russians missed all of the S-300s and ended up destroying Ukraine's older equipment. We're now going to be moving into the area of Mala Tokmachka, where we saw that a Russian supply truck got destroyed by a Stupna. When you see them looking at the supply truck, and we now see it go up in a ball of flame, the crew cheering on with great celebration, and it's nice to see that those supplies will not make it anywhere. Well, that
they usually don't have a colored screen, do they? In most of these?
Usually they have a black and white screen, and I'm glad you pointed that out. This one is called the Stugna Gucci model because it has the good camera. Of course, I'm just kidding. It's a Stugna P. But with that, we are now moving on out of the southern front, and while we have seen some news in this area, we haven't seen any frontline changes that we can report of today. However, in the Kherson area, it does appear that the Russians are still withdrawing, and at a pretty decent rate. Before we move on to the frontline news, to show you all this fact, here in the Kherson area, on the railway bridge crossing the Kosheva River, we saw that a checkpoint has been abandoned completely by the Russians, and here they don't even have, I guess you could say, any Ukrainian forces nearby. This is actually behind the city, facing southwards, yet this checkpoint has already been abandoned. When you see the checkpoint right here on the railroad bridge, as the Ukrainian goes inside, you can see that it's completely empty. There's no one around.
Сейчас покажу. Вот это кошевой мост.
And with that, that's the end of the video, but gotta say, if the Russians are abandoning checkpoints behind the lines in the middle of Kherson, imagine how bad off they really are. And I gotta say, it's gotta be real bad at this point. Because why in the world would they abandon a checkpoint in the middle of nowhere? Well, not in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Kherson, for that matter. If you go down here and look at this, this is that railroad bridge right here. And they just abandoned it. They just are up and gone. And it shows you how deficient the Russians are of manpower in this area as they continue to withdraw forces across the river. Meanwhile, on the Dnipro, we saw that the one Russian pontoon bridge that they have came under fire tonight. We don't know the damage that's been caused, but we can see that the night sky was being illuminated by defensive fire and also missiles hitting that pontoon bridge from the Ukrainians. And as far as I can tell y'all, I believe that this bridge, the pontoon bridge, is the one that was moored directly alongside the Antonovsky Bridge. It appears that the Russians were finally able to get that one operational, but now the Ukrainians have ensured that it's no longer operational, and they're most likely going to be going back to using the pontoon here soon. Not the pontoon bridge, but just the pontoon or the barge, if you'd like to call it either one. Now moving on into the front lines near Stepney, we did see that the Ukrainians are delivering grad barrages Amazon Prime style. Here is a video of them doing that. Same day shipping. We both had one-liners right there.
Yes.
And so that's the end of that clip, but it is nice to see that the Ukrainians do believe in same-day delivery. We're now going to be moving on further down the line towards the area of Cherivne, where we saw that 3 new conscripts have been captured. And apparently, according to them, they never even got to fire a shot. Imagine that, being conscripted by the Russians, and then making it to Ukraine, and being captured without even doing anything. And that's probably the best way to go, really, but here's the video.
Фамилия, имя, отчество.
Базарев Виктор Владимирович.
Откуда родом?
Белгородская область, Губкинский район, село Истобное.
Когда мобилизирован?
22
Какого месяца?
Сентября.
Какого года?
22-го.
Этого года, да? Должность?
Ну, дали гранатомет.
Гранатометчик,
да. Но я его не стрелял даже с него.
I also like how this guy was sent to the front lines, Matthew, wearing a cardigan and some blue jeans. I have a feeling that...
Now, I will say, Enforcer, real quick before you play the video, if you saw this thumbnail right here without having any context, you would think something else had happened.
Well, that's actually true. That is true.
Отвечай на вопросы, не больше, не
Я
меньше.
его выкинул.
Wait a minute, those aren't blue jeans, those are like boxers.
They look like athletic shorts or something.
Wait a minute, is that
I
like
don't
a
know what the hell
plastic
that is.
trash bag that's been turned into pants? We now see one of them over here trying to act like Cool Bob smoking a cigarette with his hands tied up. Now you see that they stopped him for being Cool Bob.
сюда попал 14.09. 14.10.
Of course, all of them are wearing mismatched camo.
14.10 сюда попал должность. Вообще водитель-химик ставили, но сделали сводную роту, типа стрелки или хер его знает. Мы сами даже ничего не знаем.
Wait, Cool Bob is still over here, actually. This is the third prisoner. That is Cool Bob, still smoking a cigarette.
Вас в плен взяла патрульная полиция.
And with that, that's the end of the video, and I gotta say, it's really interesting to see that conscripts have already made it to the front, and they're already being captured, apparently without even putting up any kind of resistance. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of that part of the front line, and we're now going to be moving towards Oleksandrivka, where we saw another captured Russian.
Тебя Толик зовут? Как твоя фамилия? А? Зайцев. А какого года ты рождения? 79-го? Месяц и день. 27 ноября.
And with that, that's the end of that video, but once again, you can see that prisoners are being captured at a pretty decent rate in this area around Kherson. And I believe that man actually said Zaitseva, which, if I'm correct, Zaitseva is right here. So I think we may have gotten that location wrong. If either he's saying he is from Zaitseva and he was pulled out of the village, because I believe the Russians do control that one at this moment, although our front line does not show it, and then he was pushing the service down here as they considered him in the LPR. I'm not entirely sure about that story, but if anyone could clarify what he said and translate that, please let me know. Moving on into Oleksandrivka, however, we can see that the Ukrainians were scoring some hits on some Russian equipment here as well. We can also hear some kind of a dubstep playing on in the background.
Oh,
you see that they got a hole
perfect.
in one, went straight through the commander's hatch, and started a fire on the inside. We can now see them hitting a supply truck as well. And a small little fire has started in the back of the supply truck. We can see the drone hovering around and taking a good look at its good work, its good deed of the day as the supply truck begins to burn the black smoke of death. And that supply truck is really starting to go up. It's just turned into a ball of flame. J-Dub said, that was techno, not dubstep. I really don't know. I just said that to say it. I don't know what kind of music that is. I don't listen to modern music to know. But with that, that's the end of that video. And it's nice to see that the Ukrainians are still scoring some pretty decent hits on the Russians down in the south. And with that in mind, it appears that the Russians are still evacuating their collaborators, some civilians, and their armed forces over to the other side of the Dnipro River, and it will most likely only be a matter of time before Kherson is liberated and the entire northern bank of the Dnipro River is clear of Russian forces. And so with that, we have now reached the end of today's news. We're now going to be moving to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 246 of the war in Ukraine, and with that, we'll be rounding out our news segment and beginning our question segment, which will go on for the rest of the night. And so without further ado, here's the speech from the one, the only, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on the 26th of October of this year.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Провів сьогодні велику нараду щодо ситуації в енергетиці. Учасники були урядовці, Офіс енергетичної компанії ДСНС. Тематика різнопланова – це і відновлення пошкоджених об'єктів, захист генерації, забезпечення доступу людей до енергії. Окремо проаналізували стан атомної та гідрогенерації, відповідно ситуацію на Запорізькій атомній станції та на Каховській гідроелектростанції. Російські терористи створили нашим енергетикам настільки складні умови, яких ніхто в Європі ще попросту не бачив, не зустрічав. Не було таких загроз, які зараз змушені долати наші спеціалісти, і вони з честю їх долають. Я дякую всім працівникам енергогалузі, нашим рятувальникам, ремонтникам бригад, представникам місцевого самоврядування, приватним компаніям, які працюють достатньо ефективно, щоб, попри всі загрози, зберігати стабільність нашої енергосистеми. В багатьох містах і районах України відбуваються аварійні відключення енергопостачання. Доводиться обмежувати споживання енергії. Але ми всі маємо пам'ятати одне: нам потрібна перемога над Росією і в енергетичній сфері. Що б не робив ворог, наше завдання – ламати його плани і захищати Україну. І це не просто чиєсь там завдання, це стосується не лише енергетиків чи когось іншого. Зараз потрібне свідоме споживання енергії всіма українцями. Оберіть, будь ласка, кожен свою схему обмеження споживання електрики, поки в загальній енергосистемі є дефіцит. Ситуація на передовій суттєвих змін не зазнала. Найбільш жорсткі бої на Донеччині, Бахмутський напрямок, Авдіївка. Там зараз найбільше видно божевілля російського командування. День за днем, протягом місяців вони гонять туди людей на смерть. Зосереджують там максимальну потужність артилерійських ударів. Усі наші воїни, які тримають позиції на цих напрямках, на Донеччині, просто герої. Продовжуються активні дії на інших напрямках. Хочу сьогодні відзначити бійців 25-ї повітряно-десантної бригади за хоробрість при звільненні окупованих територій на Луганщині. Загалом по фронту всюди зміцнюємо наші позиції, скорочуємо можливості окупантів, знищуємо їхню логістику і готуємо хороші новини для України. Сьогодні протягом дня повітряна тривога кілька разів була на більшій частині території нашої держави. Є результати у повітряних сил. Збито черговий вертоліт окупантів, чергові дрони. До речі, загальна кількість збитих російських гвинтокрилів наближається вже до 250. Російські окупанти втратили вже стільки техніки, авіаційної та іншої, скільки більшість армій світу просто не мають і ніколи не матимуть на озброєнні. Відновити ці втрати Росії не вдасться. Я дякую усім нашим бійцям за таку поступову і незворотню демілітаризацію ворога. Продовжуємо робити все можливе, щоб звільняти наших людей з російського полону. Сьогодні нарешті можна вже повідомити про звільнення ще 10 українців. Наша команда, яка займається обмінами, працює без перерви. Я хочу ще раз підкреслити, що прискорити обміни може будь-який наш підрозділ на передовій за рахунок взяття у полон окупантів. Чим більше російських військових буде у нашому обмінному фонді, тим швидше ми повернемо українців додому з Росії. Сьогодні у Києві був з візитом президент Гвінеї-Бісау. Він також головує в економічному співтоваристві країн Західної Африки. Фактично він є представником одразу 15 африканських країн, що входять до цього співтовариства. І це перший африканський лідер, який відвідав нашу державу після 24 лютого. Загалом ми послідовно розширюємо наші контакти з Африкою. Наповнюємо їх новим змістом, багато переговорів і домовленостей відбуваються вперше в нашій історії. Дуже важливо, щоб на цьому континенті, де вплив Кремля традиційно суттєвий, чули українську позицію і знали повну правду про те, що реально відбувається. Ми це забезпечуємо. Щоденно працюємо і над тим, щоб захистити нашу зернову експортну ініціативу. Очевидно, що Росія знову має намір загострити глобальну продовольчу кризу, знову повернути загрозу масштабного голоду. І це, зокрема, відповідальність усіх наших партнерів. Все ж таки гарантувати продовольчу безпеку і покінчити з цією брудною російською грою і з голодом. На сьогодні через свідоме російське гальмування нашого продовольчого експорту кількість суден, які очікують можливості виконати контрактні зобов'язання, вже 175. І це не просто якась там торговельна проблема, це погіршення доступу до їжі для мільйонів людей і загроза ще більшого зростання цін на базові продукти на різних континентах, і в Африці, і в Азії, і в Європі. Якщо все ж таки Росії вдасться негативний сценарій, це завершиться новою масштабною міграційною кризою. Росія, як держава-терорист, терорист в усьому і заслуговує щоденного посилення міжнародного тиску на неї. Я вдячний тим лідерам і тим політикам, які це розуміють і забезпечують. Вдячний, зокрема, Сенату Польщі, який ухвалив рішення офіційно визнати Росію державою спонсором тероризму. І такі рішення мають бути ухвалені більшістю країн світу. Сама ж Росія своїми ж діями не залишає альтернативи. Я дякую усім, хто допомагає нам боротись проти російського терору. Слава усім, хто воює і працює заради свободи України. Слава Україні!
That is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and that also rounds out day 246 of the news of the war in Ukraine. Of course, I thank everyone so much for watching tonight, and if you did enjoy, please make sure to subscribe, as this news runs every single day of the week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays. We take that day off. And so, with that, thank you everyone so much once again for watching the news. I've enjoyed covering it with all of y'all, and now we're about to move into the question segment, where we're going to address all of the super chats that have been sent in, and also as many live chats as possible. And so, with that, before we get to the questions, let's cover the polls. What do we got, Matthew?
All right, so for the final question segment, we do have 2 more polls to address, and the first one said, do you think Putin is losing so badly that he's become desperate? It looks like 58% said yes, he is most desperate now, 9% said I'm not sure yet, and 33% said no, he will become more desperate. Now for me, I think he's going to become more desperate. The worst has yet to come for Russia, I think, but that's my opinion. Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say that worse things could be ahead. That's one thing that I do believe. I think that Putin will try and get more and more desperate. We may see more missile attacks occur inside of Ukraine. They may use the remainder of the missile forces that they have left to try and turn the war in their favor in some direction, but based off of what they've been targeting, it's not going to turn anything in their direction. It's going to kill more Ukrainian citizens and end more lives. So I would have to agree entirely with the idea that Putin will become more desperate, but I don't think it'll do anything to change the direction that this war is already going in. And so with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well, or that polly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
For sure, I will say on that poll one more thing. I think Russia is going to see a sharp decline in their museum inventories very soon, because that's where they're going to get their next inventory.
Yeah, you're about to see... Wait, hang on. You're about to see the mouse... Hang on. Not that one. The mouse tank, not the book. I don't even know what the book's about. But we're about to see the mouse, like, this exhibit in the Kupiansk Tank Museum just disappear. And everyone's going to be like, hey, where is it? And you're going to see it on a Ukrainian drone bomblet video where they're dropping bomblets onto the top of the turret.
I've always found it ironic they call this tank a mouse, because it's like one of the biggest, most bulky tanks I've ever seen. And it's like they call it a mouse.
Well, you know, the Germans at this point, I think that the meth had gotten into the Germans' heads, because they called this thing a mouse, and they called this thing, and I'll show you real quick, the Goliath. And let me show you how big the Goliath is. Here's a picture of some British soldiers standing next to a couple of Goliaths.
I've never seen those before, ever. Like, what exactly was the purpose?
Believe it or not, here's a little illustration to show you. These things were wire operated. They were remote control suicide bombs.
Really?
Yeah, the Germans had them. They didn't use them a lot, but they did have them. And this is what they are. And I mean, like, isn't that crazy? Like, honestly, I guess you could say that this would be, this Goliath here, in some vehicles around this time frame in World War II, would be the first examples of remote control or kind of drone-operated systems that ever existed. Is that crazy or what? And we had these things 70 years ago.
It's really crazy. Like, I'm even shocked they even exist.
Yeah, and also real quick, some people are saying top tier German humor. I think it is kind of funny. And also another thing that y'all may find really interesting, and this is one thing I hate, is when people talk about history and people who have come before us, people who've died 100 years ago, and they say that they were backwards and they were stupid. People back 100 years ago were not stupid at all. Those people were quite smart. Let me show y'all something that y'all have maybe never heard about. I'm going to show y'all a disappearing gun. And this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, I know, but some of y'all may never know about this. And something that's become obvious in this war is that guns that are in the open are pretty easy targets. And people back then, 100 years ago, knew that. They were like, wow, guns in the wide open are really easy to hit. How do we make them hard to hit. So they came up with something called the disappearing gun. The disappearing gun is on a massive hydraulic mount, and it sits inside of this big, giant concrete bunker, pretty much. It's an open air bunker. There's no roof to it. But whenever this gun was not in use, it was below the line of sight you had with that concrete, I guess you could say, rampart. And if there was a ship in the distance that they had to fire at, they would turn on the hydraulic system. That gun would literally run over the top of the rampart. I've actually got to pull up a video of this real quick for y'all because I'm explaining this poorly. I will show this to y'all real quick. Sorry, I know that this is a rabbit hole, but I feel like y'all are going to really find this one interesting. Disappearing gun in action. I wonder if I can find y'all a video of one of these. Alright, so let's see. This is from Washington State Parks, so I feel like this one would probably be the best one to show. And we're going to mute it, but let me show y'all a 10-inch disappearing gun. So this footage was made probably in the 1920s or the 1930s, and we can see them ramming the shell home. We can see them loading the charges, all in the 1920s, 1930s way. But here comes the part that's going to blow y'all's minds. The gun is currently, I guess you could say, in the reloading position. They now turn on the hydraulic boosts, and that thing goes racing over the top, and it can now be fired at a ship in the bay, like that right there.
That's wild.
That's
when
insane!
Was that made?
These things existed over 100 years ago. I believe the oldest example of this thing is 130, 140 years old. It went out of use, actually, around the 1930s and 40s, but you can see this thing operating right here, and once it fires, the hydraulic systems just let the pressure out, and it immediately goes back down into the reloading position to be reloaded and fired again. It's an amazing piece of technology, and to think that they came up with something like this almost 140, 130 years ago is unbelievable. And it shows you how smart a lot of the people who came before us were to come up with stuff like this. Man, that's insane.
Crazy. That is crazy.
Strategically, this is beautiful because in the late 1800s and early 1900s, this thing was indestructible. There was no way a battleship could fire a round that could hit that gun unless if it was aimed at the exact time that that shell hit. There would have been no way to destroy it. Funnily enough, Matthew, another interesting little bit of a story here before I go too far down the rabbit hole, is that in our home state of Alabama, there are the remains of these disappearing guns at Fort Morgan. Right here, you can see what's called Battery Duportel, and right here in these two little semicircular holes would have been two 10-inch guns that operated in the exact same way. In World War II, they were moved out of their batteries and they were scrapped for the metal, but they would still be around today if it wasn't for that.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, with that little side note in there, and I forgot what the context even was of that. I just know that it's a, oh yeah, we were talking about how cool old technology was and how advanced it even was. But with that, y'all can kind of see that while we think we've come really far, people back in the day were as ingenuitive and as smart as us, and we're trying to use the cutting edge of technology then to come up with the craziest stuff that even seems crazy these days. But with that, we are on to the next poll.
All right, and the next poll says, do you think Zelenskyy hits the gym quite often? It looks like 49% said yes, he's built. 35% said yes, but before the war, and 16% said no, I don't think so. Now, for me, I gotta say, it seems to me that Zelenskyy is pretty built because the guy is like showing off his muscles and stuff there in the video. I think he hit the gym quite often, probably not recently though because he's so busy. But Enforcer, what do you think?
The man's swole.
He's swole.
He's swole. Whenever you found Zelenskyy at the gym before, it's like, hey, what's your workout? I carry the entire country of Ukraine on my back. Slava Ukraini. You know, like that's what he was saying at the gym. I'm going to become the next president. Vichna Slavia Lysim, Slava Ukraini. But with that, I gotta agree. He's got some muscles. And so with that, I hope that does address that poll fairly well. And it looks like 50% of y'all agreed that he was built. He was swole. And with that, we are on to the next one. If we don't have another poll, let's get on into those questions.
All right, so that was the last poll. So we're moving on to our first super chat of the final segment, which goes to Psyops once again, who puts in another $20 donation. He says, Robo Matt for president. Muhaha. Enforcer loves it when the chat is political. And yes, he does. He loves it. Not really.
Oh, man. And thank you for the support, Sibes. And also, You're always stirring up something. It's really funny, I gotta say. But thank you so much once again for the support, Saps, and helping this channel to keep on running. You've been around forever, supporting this channel, helping us to keep the lights on behind the scenes, and helping us to just keep this thing rolling. And for that, I have to thank you a whole load. Because if it wasn't for viewers like you, this wouldn't be possible. Just in case, if you haven't heard the spiel, this is the only way we support the channel. We don't run ads on the streams, so the only way that we are able to keep this thing running is through viewer support. And of course, that is entirely optional. And I love that idea as well. Y'all get to decide whether y'all want to support this channel or not. Y'all don't even have to waste a second watching an ad. And of course, I removed those at the beginning, like within the first day of them running, because I found them super annoying, and so we never ran them again. They are run on videos, however, because for some reason, YouTube won't push our videos unless if we're running ads, so we have to run ads on those, which is just really lame. But anyways, moving on from that, you get to decide how much you want to support this channel, if you want to at all. If you want to just watch the channel and not support us, you can do that. And if you want to support the channel, you can support us, and you can even decide how much you want to support us with. And I think that's a great way to run a channel, and I thank you so much, of course, Psyops, for supporting us so much. You've helped us out a lot, and you've always been a source of a good laugh and some pretty good comedy here on this channel. And so everyone give a huge round of applause to Psyops just for being like the comedic relief in the live chat. He's great at pulling out some pretty good jokes and also doing a little bit of mischief. And with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and up next, we have a $50 super chat from Taras Magitz, who says, what do you guys think that the Russian male citizens that crossed Russian borders are doing now? Will they assimilate to their new environment?
So, can you reread that one again real quick?
Yes, Taras says, what do you guys think about the Russian male citizens that crossed Russian borders are doing now? Will they assimilate to their environment?
Well, that's always a tough answer. You see, because usually, whenever, and of course, you know, I know this is a good joke, but in all seriousness, speaking of immigration of most kinds, there is always friction with immigration. I know that, you know, and of course, this is the thing nowadays that comes up in politics a decent amount. And it's just crazy because you can look back like 150 years when the Irish were coming over to the United States because of the Great Famine, and you would see like the exact same arguments had about the Irish 150 years ago that are had now. It's incredibly hilarious, really, when you think that it's never that one instance of anything has never changed. It's always been the same, and you'll see it in the it will repeat in the exact same form in every single country around the world. It's the craziest thing ever, like crazy in how similar and how constant of a reality that is. But moving on from that, and moving on into the joke, that is a pretty good one. Honestly, I gotta be honest with you, considering that it appears that they are on a tourist visa, I don't think they'll be assimilating. I think that they'll be returning back, and it looks like the Ukrainian border guards are getting fairly well at weeding out the ones that did not get any kind of a visa. Of course, some of them appear to have come into the country for work as well, but it doesn't look like many of them are showing their green cards, and so it looks like the Ukrainians are giving them the red card in a way. And so that, thank you so much for the support, and also a pretty good joke. And of course, thank you so much, Taras Magitz, for the support. It helps this channel to keep on running, and without viewers like you, this wouldn't be possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Panama Floyd, who says $20 for Bayraktar. Keep it going, Enforcer and Matt.
And thank you so much for the support, and also thank you so much for enjoying the Bayraktar song. That one was actually made by a Ukrainian army band, and I'm gonna say I really like that version. Of course, the original version has been asked for a lot, and I don't think that some people know how serious copyright can be, and so we cannot ever play that one again because it's now been copyrighted. So, but we can play the one from the Ukrainian army band. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I thank you for enjoying Bayraktar. And so with that, before I run a lot of y'all off, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And Enforcer, I just realized that about half the time I'm talking, my mic's not even picking me up. I'm not sure why it's doing that, but I need to fix it. Because I was saying something just now, I was laughing, and it wasn't even picking it up. But anyways, up next, we have a $20 super chat from Jose Ruano, who says, do you agree that Kaliningrad should be returned to Germany since Russia has decided to annex any territory they are claiming was part of their empire? Therefore, they have no rights over that area historically. Am I right?
Well, that is an interesting question. Actually, I believe correct yourself, sir. It's not Kaliningrad. It is actually Königsberg. Get it right. I'm just kidding with you. But yes, by the Russians' context, that should be German, which is kind of interesting to see that they're hypocritical. But I gotta be honest with y'all. While I always sit there and say that the Russians are hypocritical with how they apply things, that's the way every country operates in the world. The United States, Germany operates that way, but one thing is, and one thing that a lot of people don't get is that international diplomacy isn't supposed to be fair. It's supposed to benefit you, and you're supposed to unfairly apply it to other people. So in that regard, Germany ought to be able to apply their logic, the Russians' logic, onto Kaliningrad, or what would have been called East Prussia back in the day, or Königsberg, and say, the Germans owned that a while ago. The people there are German, although they're not anymore. That's a long story, but they're not. And that should be German land. We should get East Prussia back. Of course, I don't think the Germans would do that because historically they have a kind of a natural fear now of doing anything similar to like that because they're scared of a short mustached man popping up again. But you are correct; they could do that based off of the Russian logic. And so with that, I thank you for the support and also a pretty interesting comment. That was actually a pretty funny one, and that's always been a point that a lot of people have brought up is about Kaliningrad. And in case if y'all did not know, the Russians actually pulled off the worst maritime disaster in history, and all that was during wartime, but it's still in history, during the Second World War when they sank the Wilhelm Gustloff. That just set sail from the port of Königsberg during the Second World War. A Russian submarine torpedoed it, and that ship was full of German refugees. It was estimated, based off of how many survivors there were, that around 7,000 German refugees drowned to their death in the icy waters of the Baltic Sea that night when that submarine attacked that ship. It is by far the worst maritime disaster in recorded history. And for some reason, much like the Sultana, which is another disastrous one, it is never talked about, although both of those ended up having more people killed in them than the Titanic. And so I hope y'all enjoyed that interesting little rabbit hole and a short little tidbit of history about modern Königsberg or Kaliningrad. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support and also a very interesting question.
All right, and up next, a big shout out to David Prange for putting in a $20 donation. He didn't leave a comment, but David, I know you've been around for a very, very long time. And also, you qualify as a channel legend, by the way. So congratulations on the title. But David, thank you very much for the support. And Enforcer, would you like to add a few words?
And thank you so much for the support, David. You have been around forever. You are a old guard Discord member, and I thank you so much for always being around, always enjoying these streams, and of course, helping us to keep them running. Without y'all, it wouldn't be possible. And so I gotta thank y'all so much once again, because it helps us out a lot. And of course, while support isn't everything, it does keep the lights on in the background and helps us to keep on going to college and also help us to focus on going to law school. And so I thank you so much, David, for your wonderful support, and it helps us out greatly. Also, before we move on to the next one, Matthew, everyone's saying it's not remembered because Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't on it, and that's actually a really good point. I'll have to make sure that we get in contact with Steven Spielberg and Leonardo DiCaprio and have them make a movie on that one. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support, David, and thank you so much for being an old guard of the Lee Spring Army.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from White Lightning 777, who says, do you think the USA should use Defense Production Act to double oil and gas production? If done, prices would crash, defunding Putin and end the war. And oh man, that is a good question, and I have an answer, but sadly it would get very political, but I have like the exact answer for you on that one.
I can give an answer, but it has to be politically neutral, and so just keep in mind, everyone, when I'm saying what I'm about to say, this is entirely without any kind of political affiliation. This is all just based off of what would be advantageous for the United States at the moment, but it would be beneficial right now, considering the current situation, for the United States to enact the Defense Production Act and to start producing oil and gas within the United States. It is critically important right now, considering that our rival, the Russian Federation, along with OPEC, which is not really our rival, but still, pretty much a monopoly on world oil production, has decided to start cutting their production and also raising prices, along with pretty much the Russian embargo on natural gas and oil being exported to the Western world. It would be beneficial right now to increase the production. That way, we can make sure to keep prices low while, and also pretty much, I guess you could say, knock the legs out from under OPEC and Russia at the moment, where they will just constantly be stockpiling their oil and be forced to lower their price of oil and natural gas if they want to sell it on the foreign market. And we could also alleviate, through our production, the strain that will be put onto our allies in Western Europe over the course of this winter. Now, I know, and real quick, I have to say this, I know that there are very hard line at this point political views on the production of oil and natural gas within the United States. I feel that at the current moment, due to the strategic concerns of the United States, that those political lines should kind of be absolved for the short term until we can overcome the current situation. I believe, really, that we should start to increase our production, not really for the benefit of the United States, but more so for the benefit of our allies overseas, which are going to be going through some pretty tough times here soon. And so with that, I hope that does address the question. Of course, I want to make sure to keep this in mind, everyone, that we do not touch politics on this stream. I am just saying what would be the most advantageous right now for the United States and the standing of its sphere of influence around the world. And so with that, I hope that does address the question fairly well. And I thank you so much once again for the support, and also a really interesting question that does pertain to what this war has caused, pretty much in a nutshell, in terms of, I guess you could say, foreign oil markets. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
Now, Enforcer, this doesn't really dive into politics, but do you think that we should keep releasing oil from our strategic reserves? Do you think that's wise, or do you think that that's a little bit silly strategically?
Well, it's not really, well, that is kind of getting a little political, but considering that it does pertain to the current situation.
Well, not really.
Well, you know, we'll answer it. I feel that it is as decent a move as one can make given the current circumstances. However, there's nothing being done to curtail us just eating off of strategic reserves, and we're not trying to replenish them or balance them at all. As far as I know right now, we are not trying to add any oil to our strategic reserve, and we're just eating it up. That's not, and of course, that's what it's there for. At some point, at one point or another, it's pretty much a bank account of oil that we can go into and withdraw from whenever we need to. But it's supposed to be for emergency situations, and based off of the direction that the world is going in right now, it appears that that more pressing emergency situations will be coming in the future as compared to what we're going through right now. And so it would be much more important to save the oil for the future, or at least until this situation blows over, because just being honest with everyone, while I do not believe that World War III will begin, we're closer to World War III right now than we may have ever been in the past, over the past 2 decades or 3 decades. And so for that reason, we don't really want to eat up the strategic oil reserve before we have to go into overdrive mode, and then the US military will need it, and also will probably still need that to run the private sector within the United States and make sure that the war machine can keep on running at that point. So we want to make sure to try and figure out some way to produce and stockpile the oil, or at least level off, or I guess you could say create a balance in between the consumption and the new additions of oil to our reserves, so that way we don't run out before we really need it. Of course, once again, that is just my view at the moment, and it's not based off of any kind of political lines. It's just looking at this entire thing as a strategic game, what would be most beneficial for the United States moving on forward. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And I know that some people are talking about, saving energy, what oil does to the environment, all sorts of things. And there are great points out there. And, of course, the world at this point is pretty much moving in the direction of trying to become, well, some parts of the world, like the United States, are moving in the directions of becoming green. And I don't think that there should be any pause to that. I believe that it should continue to move in that direction. But still, at the same time, given the current circumstance, we always have to make sure that at this very moment, we will be okay. Because electric cars, electric trains, and things like that have not hit the United States at the level that they should. In 5 to 10 years' time, we could worry about not producing oil and just eating up the strategic reserves because enough of our grid would be run solely on electricity. It wouldn't require any kind of gas whatsoever. But at the current moment, we still rely, by and large, almost entirely on oil and gas to keep our nation running. And for that reason, we have to make sure that we can keep it around, at least for the time being. In 5 to 10 years' time, that may change incredibly, though. But with that, we are on to the next one. And that was actually a really interesting question. I think that's worthy of a lot of discussion in the live chat, because there is a lot of interesting conversations to be had. Of course, I asked that if y'all do disagree with each other, please keep it civil. Don't start name-calling. It is just a discussion. At the end of the day, I don't think any of us have the ability to really change anything, at least on a level at all, worldwide. So with that, just keep that in mind and just make sure to keep the conversation civil. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Melanie Cortez, who says, "Thanks, enforcers. You two are awesome. I'm always so happy to be here. LSA are an amazing bunch of people. Slava Ukraine. Take a question from the live chat, please. And glory to all defenders of Ukraine. And sorry about the caps."
And thank you so much for the wonderful support and also the kind words as well. The kind words mean a lot to us because having people tell us that they enjoy our stream and love the Lee Spring Army encourages us a lot to keep this thing running. And so thank you so much once again. It really does mean a lot to both me and Matthew. And in honor of that, we are going to make sure to answer a live chat. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and the live chat question goes to Ad Evo, who says, "Do you think that Georgia will try to reclaim their occupied territories?"
Do I think that Ukraine will try and retake their occupied territories?
Georgia.
Georgia. Oh, I'm sorry. For some reason, I heard Ukraine. I was like, well, obviously. Moving on to Georgia, I would have to say definitely. In case y'all don't know, in 2009, Georgia was invaded by Russia, and at the end result, they ended up having to make these proxy countries, or quasi-countries, called, I believe, West Abkhazia and South Ossetia. These things are not really recognized by anyone beyond Russia, but they are recognized by Russia themselves, and the Georgians reluctantly have to recognize them due to the terms laid out at the end of the war. I don't know if they would retake them, but I feel like now is about as good a time as ever to open up a second front for the Russians and for the Georgians to try and take this back. The worst thing that can happen is that they divert a load of resources and efforts of the Russians, and they help to alleviate the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians can start to make landfill amounts of ground up here inside of Ukraine, which in the end would probably split the Russian attention so much that both of them could end up benefiting in the end. But then again, that's still kind of up in the air whether they would or wouldn't. But with that, a very good question, and I think that it does have that the Georgians do have a chance right now to try and reclaim these lost grounds that they lost in 2009. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the question. Really good one. I like that one. And thank you so much for sponsoring a live chat as well. It really does mean a lot. Of course, supporting us and helping us to keep this channel running. And I hope we were able to address that live chat fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the kind words. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Sean Mackey, who says, "Really appreciate your work. Ukraine is fighting their revolution as we did, and their sacrifice is worth the cost as they fight for their freedom. Slava Ukraine."
And also, thank you so much for the support. Ukraine is fighting for their freedom, kind of like the United States in the Revolutionary War, but I would argue that the United States was a little different, but I do see the similarities there. I do entirely agree, but the United States was a little different because we were breaking away from the British. At that point, we were considered, well, you know, of course, there's a little bit of propaganda that goes into Revolutionary War history in the United States, but we weren't considered subjects of the British, but we were considered a part of the British Empire in a way. And because of that, we were we were directly under the control of the United Kingdom at that point, unlike others, but we won't go into that. I was about to go into the East India Company, but we're not going to do that right here. Anyways, moving on from that, that is kind of true in a way. We did rise up against the British to gain our independence, although Britain is now one of our greatest allies and also a really cool country. Love the British. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, they were not Russian starting off this war. They were Ukrainian and always have been Ukrainian. And so in this regard, I would have to say that this would be I can't even really compare it in between anything in between the British and the Americans. The War of 1812 is somewhat similar, but not really. But I would have to say that the Ukrainians are fighting for their survival and their independence in that way, their sovereignty. And so I'd definitely have to agree that it is similar in that regard. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I do have to give a massive credit to the Ukrainians who keep on fighting with raw determination and spirit of many great nations and great eras of these countries that came before, like the United States during the Revolutionary War, the British during the Blitz, the French during World War I. A lot of these countries had a fighting spirit that just wouldn't die, and Ukraine is one of those countries in the 21st century. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Rob Bertram, who says, Enforcer, your knowledge of World War I to today's military history amazes me, given your young age relative to mine. In 2040, I'll definitely vote for you for president. If I'm still around, I'll be 79 years old in 2040.
And thank you so much for the kind words, and also your support and your vote in 2040. I will be looking forward to having your vote in the 2040 election, and also thank you so much for the kind words as well. I am a little bit of a history geek. The military is what I focused on a pretty good deal, but I also try to focus on, I guess you could say, the social and economic side of things, because usually those were, in a way, the lead-ups or the end results of wars, which are very interesting in their own right. And, you know, when you're a kid in school, the wars seem to be the interesting part. Also, Matthew, I'm sorry, yeah, I know. But the wars always seem to be the most interesting thing in history, but the social side of things is really cool as well. Also, the technology that people came up with in certain eras. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the support and the kind words as well. It really does mean a lot to me. And I thank you so much for enjoying this channel and also how we present it. I don't really like to get too much on a high horse or anything like that, but I do appreciate so much how everyone does have kind words and support as well. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
All right. And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Rado Kudre, who says, a thumbs up.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support once again, Kudre, and also thank you so much for the thumbs up. You didn't leave a comment, I did see that comment earlier, but I do enjoy the little thumbs up, and I thank you so much for supporting us and helping this channel to keep on running. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and up next, we have a $15 super chat from Ghost Wolf Declassified, who says, the Russian orcs are dorks, of course, roasting inside their tanks, of course, unless, of course, that ugly orc is the cowardly Mr. Putin.
Of course.
Of course.
And I thank you so much for the support. And also, a nice little rhyme. I thought that was a pretty good one. And also, the Russian orcs are dorks. I think that's a Dr. Seuss book that came out some time ago. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have another super chat from Avari Mandubratis, who puts in a $15 donation this time, and says, with your affinity for World War I weapons, would it please you to know that BB-35 Texas is in dry dock in Galveston for major hull and structural repairs? Awesome to see it towed. Lots of repair pictures online as well.
Hey! And of course, it's great to hear that. It was a long time coming. In case you all didn't know, the USS Texas is the only Dreadnought-era ship that the United States has. In fact, I believe it's one of the few Dreadnought-class ships left in the world that's intact, which is unbelievable to think. But this thing was a museum ship. You can see a picture of it here in 1919. Can you believe that, Matthew?
A long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long, long time ago. And we can actually move forward throughout history. You can see it here, I believe. Where was this taken? Texas in World War I. This was actually the Texas in World War I. Is that crazy or what? It's unbelievable to think that we had a museum ship that was around in World War I. Also, here's one of the anti-aircraft gun emplacements, and that looks insane. Just to say the least. But moving on down, we can see a picture of it here as a museum ship in the modern day. Of course, this version of the ship is its World War II refit. You can see that the conning tower, well, I guess you could say the towers are totally different. They're no longer lattice towers. I forgot what these certain kinds are called. but it's at the San Jacinto Park where the Battle of San Jacinto was won by Sam Houston against General Santa Anna in the Texan War of Independence. A really interesting story, a really interesting tidbit of history. But this thing actually was in such bad repair that it started to take on water and it listed to its side by 15 degrees. A lot of people were scared that this thing would never even make it past its moorings, but somehow they towed it to Galveston. It's now in dry dock and under repairs. I think it's well worth the effort, and I've got to be honest with y'all, I think that while it did, I guess you could say it really did prove itself on D-Day, and we're not going to go down that story right now, but it's still really cool, and I believe that they ought to refit this ship back to its original, I guess you could say, form that it was commissioned in 1917, well, actually, I believe 1912. Because that, in its own right, is a piece of history in itself. There's no other ship in the world like it. There's no other ship that still exists from that era, and it's one of a kind. And I believe that this thing deserves massive amounts of funds and efforts put its way to make sure that it stays an example of the American Navy from a time that no other Navy even has proof of its existence. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support and also bringing that up. It's a really cool little tidbit. And with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you so much once again for the support and also bringing up a cool little bit of World War I history.
All right. And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Anthony, who says, Enforcer, I noticed it takes 1 mouth for Russia to suffer, or excuse me, he meant to say 1 month for Russia to suffer 10,000 casualties. If it stays at that rate, then by the end of the year, it will be 90,000. And by February, it will be at 100,000, right at 1 year mark.
And thank you for the support, and I would have to agree with you. This war is incurring a massive amount of casualties on the Russians. It is around 10,000 a month. And so if it does go on until February, they'll be close to 90, if not 100,000 casualties. Really, at 10,000 a month, they'd be close to 120,000 casualties. And really, at this point, if the Russians are that dumb, if the Russian government is that dumb to continue pushing on this war, and for some reason the Russian army won't mutiny, I guess that's just the price they'll have to pay to lose. And that's really bad, that's a really expensive price to really gain nothing out of the whole ordeal. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, and also helping this channel to keep on running, and also bringing up an interesting point. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for bringing up a really interesting point.
All right, and up next, we have a $40 super chat from Colleen Emsley, who says, Flying is great. I did technical courses on the Sikorsky Sikorsky S-76, C, C+, and C++, as well as AS-350, Bell 212, and 412. I love the BO-105. Best flight ever was in a biplane with a stuntman. Now I live hunting and fishing on Calling Lake, AB, Canada.
Also, Matthew, the BO-105 is the Red Bull helicopter. I had to pull it up and show you that. And
that's pretty cool.
Cool enough, it is the Red Bull helicopter and one of Germany's attack helicopters in the way. It can carry anti-tank guided missiles.
Red Bull is using an attack helicopter.
Yeah, it's cool.
It gives you wings.
Yeah, Red Bull gives you wings. With the turret toss initiated. But man,
also, C and C++ and C++. I thought that was like a coding language or something.
Yeah, I was looking at that when it came in. I was like, what? It was like coded too. But man, you've got a real like career under your belt right there. You flew a lot. Real quick, we're gonna try and pull up a couple of them. The Sikorsky S-76. Oh wow. Oh wait a minute, isn't that the one? Yeah, that is the one that the royal family uses. Yeah, I recognized that. I was like, huh. A lot of people use this helicopter. It's a really nice looking one. I love the design of it. It's very beautiful. But maybe
is that your helicopter?
Is that your helicopter? Is that your helicopter? I wonder if Prince Charles is going to have this one running off of reserve white wine. But moving on,
goes to open the door, flinging his hands around, all sort of like angry, like he did with that pen and that inkwell.
Should summon the duel for me. I said Prince Charles is still a character though. But moving on to the next one, the AS-350. I've seen. Isn't this like the typical movie filming helicopter? If I'm correct. I mean, like, for some reason, I feel like it is. I feel like I've seen this before for movie filming. And there's one right there.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, I have seen these things used before for movie filming. A Bell 212, I believe that's the civilian version of the Huey, if I'm correct. It is! Oh my god, I was right. I love Hueys. I think they're really cool, and it's really cool to know that you flew one. and the BO-105 that we already pulled up before. And also, speaking of biplanes, there's this really cool site called Aerodrome. Don't be getting any ideas, anyone, but Aerodrome Airplanes, and they manufacture kits. And kits for none other than World War I planes. Y'all know I had to take it there. I'm a huge World War I buff. These things are so freaking cool. They're the same size as the World War I aircraft, exact replicas. The engines are not replicas though. That's a fortunate plus as well. But they are so freaking cool, and they look so neat.
Wait, you assemble the thing yourself and then you fly it?
Yes.
Oh my god. That scares the hell out of me.
Actually, these things are a lot safer than the original World War I aircraft, because unlike the World War I aircraft that were constructed out of wood, these actually have aluminum frames under them. So it's a lot more sturdy than I guess you could say, the World War I originals, which is good to know. But at the same time, it is still a little bit questionable. It's like will the thing fall apart? I have heard some complaints that apparently the engines that these things are bought with will pretty much rip themselves apart in under 70 flight hours, which is terrible. So a lot of people go and buy other engines instead of the ones that come with these kits, but they are still really cool. And I've had a friend at the Alvin York State Park in Tennessee that said that they had a couple of these things that flew around over the park when they were there, and they said it was incredibly cool. And so with that, I hope that does address that comment fairly well, Colleen. Also, an amazing career on your part. That is amazing to hear that you've flown so many cool and really famously known helicopters, most of them. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, Colleen Imsleet. You help us out massively in keeping this channel running, and without you, it wouldn't be possible. And also, thank you so much for giving us an interesting story. And to sum it all up, to put a cherry on top, he now lives and hunts on Calling Lake in let's see, AB Canada. I don't know what province AB is, but real quick, Matthew, if you don't mind, we're going to pull up Lake Calling. Let's see. Calling Lake. It's not British Columbia. Let me see here. It is Calling Lake, AB Canada. So, Calling Lake, Canada. Here it is, Calling Lake. Oh, it's Alberta. I should have realized that. It has Alberta and AB. Duh, I'm dumb. Anyways, Calling Lake. Let's drop down and see if we can get a street view. Well, we can't get a street view everywhere, but we do have one from 2018. This is crazy. Like, look, man, everything's like a conifer up here.
That's like a lot more deserted than I thought it would look.
Yeah, it's like Wyoming. Like, this is nuts. Like, that's really cool. Also, thank you so much once again. I gotta tell you, I gotta thank you so much for the support and also sharing that really cool story with us, and also letting us see the end at Calling Lake. I guess that in the end, that lake was your calling. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from Oats Air, who says, take a question from the chat, and Slava LSA and Slava Ukraine. And Oats Air, thank you very much for the support, and of course, Slava Ukraine. And this live chat question is sponsored by Oats Air. And it goes to, let's see here, it's going to go to David Moore, who says, any word on Russia building defensive lines at the Russian border?
I have not heard about that. I believe that there are some pictures, I think, that are circulating out there somewhere, but I haven't really heard much about it myself to really report on. And so with that, I thank you so much for the question. Sadly, I don't really have a lot of information to work off of, but thank you so much once again, Osair, for being a long-time Discord, well, not a long-time Discord guard, a long-time Lee Spring Army old guard, and thank you so much for helping to keep this channel running and supporting us through and through. It does mean a lot to us, both for your kind words and your support, and it helps this channel to keep on running, and it helps us to keep the lights on. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Judo 2001, who says, Professor Mortar, let's see. Uh-oh. I don't think I can read that one. I just now caught on to what it said. But he says, I will spare you this time and sponsor a question from the chat. Good work. I appreciate you. Slava Ukraine and Slava LSA.
And thank you so much for the support. And while we couldn't read all of the super chat entirely, I thank you so much for supporting the LSA and this channel as we continue to cover this news day by day, and thanks to your support, we will be able to continue to cover this war, hopefully until the very end. And so with that, we are going to take a live chat in your honor. And so with that, what do we got?
The live chat question goes to Heather Fitzgibbon, who says, did they use gliders in World War II like they use drones today?
Kind of. I mean, gliders in World War II were used to drop off airborne troops. Drones these days are not used to really drop off men and equipment. They're used nowadays to just get surveillance and recon. So kind of in a way, I mean, I guess you could say in terms of them being airborne and giving an advantage to your fighting forces, in a way, yes. But once you start to get down into what exactly they did, the drones can't carry a lot of equipment or manpower, really none for that matter. But the gliders could. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I wish I could have heard the ending to the whole Professor Mortar thing, but apparently it can't be read aloud. And so with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you so much once again.
All right. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Kristen Adams, who says, a small token of my thanks for your work.
And thank you so much for supporting us. It does. One thing I gotta say is that I just thank you so much for the support. It is small token, massive token. It doesn't matter. The support helps us out a lot, and I gotta thank you so much for helping this channel to keep on running. And I thank you so much for appreciating our work to the point that you would find it worthy to help us to keep it running. And of course, support us. It means a lot to me. And I thank you so much that you would love to see us to continue to cover this war. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running.
All right. And moving right along to our next one, we have a $10 super chat once more from Rado Kudre, who says, just wanted to let you know how awesome job you guys are doing. Please keep it up, and thanks. And Rado, thank you very much once again for the kind words and the support.
And thank you so much, Rado, as well, for the kind words. It means a lot. And of course, we are going to keep this thing running the best we can, and thanks to y'all's support, we are able to. And so thank you. I mean, like, really, when we get kind words, it does mean a lot. And while we can't come up with new ways to say it each and every time, please do know that whenever I say thank you, I really do mean it. And so with that, thank you once again, and we are on to the next one. And also, a lot of people are talking about Mark Felton in the live chat. Mark Felton is the bomb when it comes to history videos. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, folks, I just noticed something about the new YouTube layout. Let me know in the live chat if you like the new layout or not. It's kind of strange to me. I'm not really sure if I like it. I just looked around down here in the description. It's sort of like, I think, not really an improvement. It's kind of worse than it was before. But Enforcer, what do you think about that real quick?
Real quick, let me click on it. I gotta tell y'all, I can't stand it. I don't like it at all. I don't like the new YouTube thing that they've done. It doesn't look good to me. I liked it the old way. They've changed the interface like 3 times in the past month. Just pick something and stick with it at this point. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now on this. Hopefully everyone gets used to it. We're gonna have to get used to it. They also changed up our whole studio and dashboard as well, which is really weird and annoying. So now I gotta relearn everything. But with that, I hope that does address that, and let us know what y'all think as well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Right. And for the next one, we have a $10 super chat from Craig Platel, who says, to our don't, let's see here. I think Craig meant to say we don't rebore 16-inch barrels, you reline them. Pre-1980s barrel life, several hundred full charge equivalents. I think he meant to say new additives. In 80s increased barrel life to 1,800 or more rounds.
And thank you for the support and also clarifying some information on that. Let me pull that up. Reboring. Bore out the cylinders of an internal combustion engine again, typically in order to widen them. Reboring artillery. Let me see if that is correct. Rebore of big guns. So there, do guns have to be rebored or rebarreled? Let's see. Actually, wow, this is on the Great War Forum. Okay, hang on. Barrels certainly did wear. 18-pound field guns were frequently rebarreled, as were many howitzers of the RGA. Let's see. by my reckoning, they had fired in excess of 22,000 rounds. But real quick, let's go up here and let's find out relining artillery. Yes. Well, let's see here. You are correct. It is relining. Apparently there is reboring, but it appears to be for rifles, not artillery. And so I thank you for clarifying that and allowing me to make sure to correct that, because I don't want to say anything that's wrong. And if it is just markedly wrong, I do thank you so much for correcting it. Of course, have to say this, because some people get a little bit too, I guess you could say, enthusiastic with correcting. You don't always have to call someone an idiot if they're wrong, you know, because I have seen some people do that in the live chat. All you have to do is say, hey, Enforcer, I think it's actually this. I think it's not reboring. I think it's actually relining. Could you check on that for me? And I will check on it, and if it's wrong, I will correct it, like, right here. But whenever we see anyone that's like, you idiot, it's like, why in the world do you got to come at us like that? We will correct it if we're wrong. You don't have to sit there and cuss us out for it. But with that, thank you so much for correcting that and also letting us know a really interesting tidbit about the metallurgy of these guns, and now we know that they can fire a whole lot more. I just wonder what kind of metal the D20s were made out of, like we saw in that video. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for support and also correcting a tidbit of misinformation that we put out there. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
Right. And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Rob Bertram. Once again, he says, I've been watching since, I think, day 4, maybe day 6. So how many subscribers did you have back then? And Enforcer Matt, can we get a...
And we can, for some reason, Matthew, your microphone's doing some really weird stuff because...
Yeah, I know. I can tell. It's like, it's blinking and flashing. I'm not sure what's going on, but when I first start talking, it's not picking me up for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, when you start talking as well, it almost sounds like you're running into the room from somewhere else every single time. It's really weird. But to answer that question, could you reread it again, Matthew?
Rob says, I've been watching since, I think, day 4, maybe day 6. How many subscribers did you have back then? And Enforcer Matt, can we get a yeehaw?
So back then, believe it or not, on day 4, I had 1.7 thousand subscribers. We've now grown all the way up to, let me go check right now, 106,120. So if you would like to see that number grow and you have not subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe button, because you will help us to grow. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support and also the question. We have come a long way since day 4 and day 6, and also you have been around forever. And I thank you so much for being an old guard member of the Lee Spring Army. Older than the Lee Spring Army itself, as a matter of fact. The Lee Spring Army came around on like day 15 or 17, and you've been around before then, which is a long time ago. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, and also a really interesting question. We have grown a lot since then, and the Lee Spring Army continues to grow. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Chester Meef, who says, actually, the Gustav gun he just showed only fired 49 rounds in combat. Then the barrel was worn out because they fired 200 rounds in practice.
And thank you for the support. That's also a really good point to bring up. One thing that I had actually forgotten while talking about that gun is that it could fire 250 rounds, but they fired 200 of them in training, and so when it finally got to Sevastopol, it could only fire about 50. Also, the thing was I know this will take a little bit of while to talk about, but the Schwerer Gustav was a pain in the, like, there's no other way to explain, a pain in the ass to operate. Like, imagine having to build everywhere this thing went. If you wanted to transport it out of Germany, you had to build 2 side-by-side railroads at a certain distance apart to get this thing anywhere. It took multiple locomotives to pull it around. You could see that the thing's just ungodly massive. It was a waste of time and energy and effort by really the entirety of the German arms industry to make this thing, and of course it was in the German obsession to just make the biggest freaking weapons known to man at the time. Were they ever effective? No, they were a waste. But still, a really interesting tidbit of history. And also, thank you for correcting us on that, because of course, we don't want to get anything wrong. And I thank you for also clarifying that little tidbit of information. I did get it correct that it could only fire 50 rounds once it got to the front, but I forgot to mention, and just completely forgot the fact, that it fired 200 rounds in training. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for helping us to correct a little bit of information we had there on the Schwerer Gustav.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from the entire family once again. Billy, Joe, Carl, Bob, Danny, and Frank. And also, it looks like, never mind, I'm not going to mention that. But anyways, the whole family says, Matt, you forgot an option. Yes, I want to be a fighter pilot, but being too car/seasick to do it. Same goes for boat life, and I love boats. And, honestly, I have a hard time believing that not one of you out of the entire family is not seasick. That's hard to believe.
Oh man, I'm seasick. I'm not gonna lie to you all. I get seasick, and I that's why I don't like the sea. I get seasick. I'm sick of the sea. If you'll see the pun. But moving on from that, I thank you so much for the support, the whole family, and also that is pretty interesting here. And I do find it kind of find it bizarre, Matthew, that no one in his family gets seasick. Is that what he's trying to say?
He's trying to say that the entire family gets seasick.
Interesting. The whole family gets seasick.
Yes.
Okay, that's even weirder. I mean, but I thank you for the support, and also pretty interesting here. Now, I actually see that the whole family is asking, whenever they get a copyright strike, is that they lose the monetization for that specific vid. Are you even, and you aren't even monetized, right? So what's to worry about? Real quick, to answer that, the whole family, because I think you may be a little bit confused on content ID and copyright strikes. I can only get 3 copyright strikes before this channel is deleted off the face of the earth. So if I get 3 of them and they're all standing on this channel is gone and will cease to exist, and it will never show up again. What you're thinking about is a content ID. That's when someone comes through, well, the YouTube algorithm comes through, and they look at a video and they go, oh, that song is owned by someone else, or something like that. And so then they content ID it, you lose the monetization on that video, which we don't run anyways, but then the copyright holder has ads run on our video, and they make revenue on it. Also, that also adds a whole bunch of confusion when a viewer comes on and we say we don't run ads. They go, oh, well, I went to day 120 and there's ads running on it. You're a liar. And it's really the content ID thing, and someone else is running the ads on our video. But copyright strikes are very serious, and we can't run the risk of having them, because if I ran like 12 videos and then 4 people came through and were like, oh, I want a legal takedown request on that song because it's mine and he's using it wrongfully, our channel is gone forever. So we can't really have that around. So, well, we can't really do that. So with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
All right, and up next, we have a $5 super chat from Badger Resistance, and I really like that username, by the way, who says, Enforcer, can you believe the USS Enterprise was scrapped for used metal?
Yes, I can. Oh, it's a sad thing to talk about, the USS Enterprise, the first nuclear carrier in the world, a frigate ship. What the hell? Wait, they called it a frigate ship on Google. It's an aircraft carrier. What in the world? And also, we could hardly pick up you laughing, Matthew. All I heard was like
his mic's getting on my nerves so bad.
It's really getting on my nerves because you sound like this every time you start talking. Hello, everyone. And it gets louder as you keep talking. Like it just irks me. But anyways,
come on, man.
Oh, come on, man. But anyways, moving on to the USS Enterprise. Really cool aircraft carrier, famous. Of course, Star Trek made it even more famous because every single lead ship in the main series was named the USS Enterprise, and it's an amazing aircraft carrier. I cannot believe that they went and retired this thing, and not only retired it, but signed its fate off to scrapping. What a terrible disservice to one of America's most iconic aircraft carriers and a large piece of our history. Also. Oh, wait a minute. Someone said not that Enterprise.
They're talking about the Starship Enterprise.
Let's see. Wait a minute.
Are they?
Some of the best ships, the Big E. Some people are saying the Big E. Some people are saying it's the older one. I believe some people are talking about the World War II Enterprise, the CV-6. But as far as I remember, the CV-6... Wait a minute. No. Wait a minute. Hang on. Wait a minute. This thing did get hit by kamikaze, but apparently it survived the war and then was decommissioned in 1947. So then it was scrapped in 1958 to 1960, but this one, I mean, there's a lot of ships like this around. I mean, like the USS Midway is a museum ship that's a example of, I guess you could say, a refit version of one of these older World War II aircraft carriers. But moving back on to the one I think was the one that was mentioned, the USS Enterprise CVN-65, it's just so sad to think that this thing got scrapped. Like... Well, I honestly feel like this USS Enterprise was more so a piece of history than the other USS Enterprise from World War II. There was a lot of aircraft carriers we used in World War II, and that Enterprise only played a small part. This one was the flagship of the entire US Navy for a decent amount of its service life, and it's just sad to think that it's gone. Of course, it was replaced by a very interesting ship. I guess you could say the Gerald R. Ford, which is now going to be taking up the Enterprise name, and the Gerald R. Ford is pretty neat, but it still doesn't have that kind of, well, probably because it's not aged as well and doesn't have as much of a service history as the original Enterprise, but still a really interesting ship nonetheless. But of course, thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well, and I hate to see such historic pieces of history just going down the drain. The HMS Vanguard is also a great example of that as well. But with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right. And up next, we have a super chat from Sir Ner Vikinger, who puts in a $15 donation and says, "Hey guys, sending prayers and love to you all from Iceland. Small question. We have 2 rotten apples on our NATO tree. Can they be picked off and thrown in the trash? Slava Ukraine."
And I thank you so much for the support, Cerner Vikinger. And let me pull that up real quick. ISK, where is that from? ISK. Wait a minute, hang on. Dang it, you just said Iceland. Why in the world am I doing that? Dang it. I thank you for the support.
I'm wondering what you're pulling that up for.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, why is he pulling that up?
I had a mental feedback loop there, and it just threw me off. But thank you so much for the support. Also from Iceland. In case of y'all didn't know, Iceland is home to the tallest people in the world, I believe, if I'm remembering that fact correctly. And they also have this this dish called, like, what's it called? It's like a lunkfish or something like that, but it's like some kind of a fermented shark. And it's apparently fermented in something that you can use as a dishwasher detergent, which is really interesting. But anyways, moving on from that, let's see. It's really cool to hear you're from Iceland, actually, before I move on to answer the question. Iceland is a cool country. We don't have a lot of Lee Spring Army members from Iceland, but it is cool to know that we reach all the way up almost into the Arctic Circle at this point with the viewers. And so thank you so much once again, and really cool to hear. Also, maybe one day I'll make it to Iceland. It's a really cool country. Moving on from that, though, and to answer that question, sadly, once you become a NATO member, you can never leave. There's no way to get rid of a NATO member, as far as I know. So we will never be able to get rid of what you're calling the bad apples. They will be around for a while, and we'll just hope that they stop to ripen and they start to reverse a little bit. Also, someone said fermented shark. I forgot the name of that thing. What is it called? Monkfish. Wait, no, it's not monkfish. Dang it, we can't find the name of it right now. But with that, thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope we were able to address that question fairly well, Senator Vikinger, and also a really cool name considering you're from Iceland. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and next up, we have a $2 super chat from Chronicler, who says, "Just a small gesture of support. Do take a question from the chat." And of course, we will honor the request, and thank you very much for the support. And Enforcer, is that you over there snickering?
No, I'm actually inhaling snot.
Ew.
Yeah, sorry.
I didn't want to know that.
Shouldn't have asked, man. But with that, let's hear the live chat.
All right, so the live chat question goes to Luke Mitchell, who says, "Have you seen the recent news about Israel drones being sent to Ukraine for anti-drone defense?"
I have not heard about that. I have not actually heard about any support being sent from Israel, but I'll have to try and pull up that news later on and see if I can find it and confirm that, because if so, that will be, I guess you could say, history in the making, as it'll be the first time that Israel has sent any weapons of its own or any kind of technology to Ukraine to help them out in this war. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And I can see that everyone is finally in the live chat seeing what I said right there. And you know, of course, that was a little bit of honesty on my end, maybe a little bit too much honesty, but didn't want y'all to think that I was just laughing for no reason. For some reason, I'm having a really bad time, I think, with allergies or something similar, because it's pretty rough. So with that, we're on to the next one.
And to round off our super chat segment, we have a $5 donation from BME, as well as William Jones, Joe Carey, Robin M, and a $4 donation from Junebug72, $2 donation from Dupper Bob, as well as a $1 donation from Chaz, and also Vanilla RPG Soundtracks. And they don't leave comments, but thank you all very much for your support, and we do appreciate it very much. And thank you for helping to keep us running, as always. And it looks like we got one more super chat from Chaster Meef, who I think is Master Chief spelled backwards. He puts in he puts in a $5 donation, and also look at that profile picture. Are you seeing that?
Yeah,
It's
like got arms and legs on the helmet. Like, that's really weird.
Yes, it's a creature. I guess that's why it's called Chester Meef. But anyways,
the Chester Meef creature comes out of its burrow, and I'm having a stroke again.
yes. But anyways, he says, Enforcer, but this was the one that sunk all the Japanese aircraft carriers in the Battle of Midway and was the most decorated ship in history.
And thank you for the support. That is true. That enterprise was very important in the Second World War, but like in terms of it being a first of its kind ship, it's not. I mean, I know, and of course it is a very decorated ship, and for that reason it should have been preserved. But in the same right, if I'm correct, the Yorktown class, which the USS Enterprise was a part of, how many of these were built? Completed 3, lost 2, retired 1. God, wow, that was terrible. They lost 2 of them out of 3. Dang. Also, in case y'all didn't know, this is something interesting that I learned from an interview with Prince Philip in the 90s that I watched a while ago. The American aircraft carriers in the Second World War did not have an armored flight deck. And so when the kamikaze flew into the flight deck and slammed into it, it would just go straight through the flight deck into the hangars and start a fire that could never be put out, and the whole ship would be lost. Unlike the British, which was really interesting to hear. A ship like the HMS Ark Royal from World War II, if I can find it for y'all, had an armored flight deck. And so while it doesn't look as impressive as the American aircraft carriers, if a kamikaze ran into the deck of the Ark Royal, it would blow up, and then a few minutes later there would be a British crew out there with brooms sweeping the remains of the Zero off the deck, and then it would be operational within minutes again. I did not know that, and that was really cool to hear. And so I guess you could say, and to change my opinion, now knowing that 2 of these ships were lost in the Second World War, considering that's the only surviving member of the Yorktown class, as well as being the most decorated ship in military history, I would have to agree with you, Chaster Meef, that thing should have been preserved. But, of course, I guess in some ways, the government's frugalness in some areas comes to play, and of course, for some reason, the government's frugalness, and then it's just free-handed ability to hand out money wherever is always never in like in synergy with the public, because sometimes we would love for them to just have a very frivolous expenditure like keeping the Enterprise as a museum ship, but sadly it looks like they didn't. But I would have to agree with you, considering that in mind, considering it was the only surviving ship of its class, it was the most decorated ship in history, it should have become a museum ship. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And also, Ian, you are correct, the Ark Royal was torpedoed, but it still did have an armored flight deck. And so if the Germans had kamikaze it may have survived. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
All right, and it looks like we have one more super chat, this time a $5 donation from Zig, and Enforcer, how do you say that?
Zigmoose?
Maybe? I'm not really sure, but hopefully we're pronouncing it correctly.
You probably had me to read that one just in case you were about to get had.
No, I just didn't know how to pronounce it really. I didn't want to butcher it.
Oh.
But anyways, they say Chaster Meef is the best name ever. And I have to agree, Chaster Meef is pretty unique.
Chaster Meef is pretty cool. I'm not going to lie. That is a pretty creative name. And so with that, I thank you for the support, Zigmoose, and also bringing that up, because I like to think that Chaster Meef is a pretty fun name. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
All right. And we're now moving into our live chat questions. And Enforcer, do you have a segue you want to put us into?
Yes, I do. We are doing fairly well. Let's see. Day 27. Oh, wait. We're about to get to that one from Highland Tough. I'll save that one for a second. We're about to get into the live chat questions. We're going to answer live chats until 1:30 a.m. Eastern time, so that will be about for the next 20 minutes. Considering that we kind of rounded out our super chat segment a little bit early tonight, we do have a decent amount of leeway to answer live chat questions, and I always want to make sure to try and answer as many of those as we can, whenever we can, because one thing I would love for everyone to know, you don't have to put in a super chat to get a question answered. While throwing in a super chat will guarantee that your question gets answered, that is really just to support the channel. And so if you support the channel and you throw in a question, of course we're going to make sure to answer it. But we always want to make sure to answer anyone's question, regardless whether you throw in a super chat or not. And so with that, we're going to be answering them for that long. And real quick, let's get to that last super chat there, and then we're going to go and power our way straight into the live chats.
All right, and that last super chat is from Havlin Tuff, who puts in a $2 donation and says the Leaf Spring Gaff was on day 27 at hour 1.
And thank you for the support, Highland Tuft, and also being the official timekeeper of Leaf Spring Army milestones, because that's actually pretty good to know that it happened then. I've always been saying day 15, but that's crazy to think that it happened almost a month into the war. And so with that, thank you so much once again for clarifying that, and we are now on into the live chats.
All right, and moving into our live chat questions, up first, we have our decoders of the stream, WF2U, C-Fay, and Mark Hodges, as well as a newcomer on the block, Draconia, who also figured out the Morse code, who says, Enforcer, the telegraph message tonight reads, Ivan, I think we forgot something. It's okay, Vlad, as long as it's not top secret, we should be fine. Slava Ukraine.
And I thank you so much for deciphering the Morse code. Ding, 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 ding. Y'all got it correct. That was actually an exact play on what I said on stream, and of course I said that because it was in the Morse code message, and I'm glad y'all were able to decipher it. And also, welcome to our brand new Morse code decipher. We have never had a brand new one. We've only had our original set of 3 or 4 Morse code deciphers, and so it's good to know that we have a new one on the crew. And so with that, thank you to all of y'all who've been deciphering the Morse code message, and I hope y'all enjoy that we usually have a new one every single night. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for deciphering that.
And up next, we have a question from Alex Wolf, who says, with all the evidence, do you think the war crime accusations will go anywhere?
I believe that the war crime accusations will be going pretty good ways. There's a lot of evidence showing it. There's also been a lot of UN and NATO inspectors that went to the Bucha Hospital Irpin area and witnessed those war crimes firsthand and the end result of them. And so I do believe that the war crime, I guess you could say, accusations will be heading in a direction if these Russians are captured. If they're not captured and Russia survives the war, they most likely won't. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Rick, who says, without the help of NATO countries, how long do you think Ukraine would have lasted?
They most likely would have survived months, and then they would have collapsed, because while they've been doing quite well, a lot of their abilities have been bolstered heavily by the West through Western training, through Western arms, through Western support. They've been able to survive. Without it, I don't think Ukraine would have done as well as they have been. And so with that, I hope that does address that question fairly well without getting into too much detail. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from East Coast CEO, who says, have you heard anything on the 101st?
I have not. I've only heard that they were ready tonight, and that was 3 days ago. I think they're still ready for tonight, but the poor guys in the 101st Airborne apparently can't discern night from day, so they're just ready for tonight at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from What Else Happened, who says, how are funds and armaments flowing into Ukraine now being monitored for corruption? I'm old enough to remember Ukraine's issues.
And also, thank you for the question. Very good point. Ukraine, and of course, this is something that one would be amiss to not state, Ukraine has had a lot of problems with corruption in the past. It seems like it's been curtailed over the previous few years, although it still, of course, exists out there. We have seen some examples of it, even on the, I guess you could say, police level. We have seen that policemen have been caught for corruption in the current war. But could you reread the first part of that question again, Mandy, so that way I can make sure to answer it correctly?
How are funds and armaments flowing into Ukraine being monitored for corruption?
Well, they are, I guess you could say they're monitored as best as they can. We kind of just give them over, and then we hope that they're, I guess you could say, done with well. One thing we do know, however, is that there's no way for them to go on a black market. Because think about this. Ukraine is surrounded by hostile countries, Russia and Belarus. Their ports are blockaded by the Black Sea Fleet, so only cargo ships carrying grains can get out of those ports. And then surrounding them on every other side of their country are NATO countries. So if they tried to get these weapons and sell them on a black market, how would they get them out of Ukraine even? They couldn't. Like, there's no way for them to do that. And so while we don't really have great checks to see where those weapons are going, I'm fairly certain that they are remaining within Ukrainian military hands, just for the fact there's no way for them to really get out of the country and be sold anywhere, because all the options to get them out are kind of closed off. And so with that, I hope that addresses the question fairly well. And on to the next one. I wanted to address this one myself, man. Dilly asked, and this is a question we get every once in a while, will you guys get channel memberships? No. The reason why we do not do channel memberships is that I feel it cheapens up the channel a great deal. And that's one thing that I don't like, is just like making it where it's almost like we're smacking y'all in the face and we're like, pay us, you know, because that's what memberships do. Like, you click on someone's channel, you watch their video, and this big giant window at the bottom corner of the screen pops up going, hey, become a channel member now, get benefits. Like, it's almost like trying to force you to become a member. I don't like that. I feel that if you want to support this channel, you can, and you can decide whatever amount you want. You know, it could be $1, it could be $500. We just had, I believe it was Stephen Foster throwing a $500 super chat last night. It could be any amount. Y'all can decide. But I don't want to sit there and harass the hell out of y'all to become channel members. Also, it makes the live chat kind of look a little funky. I don't like the colored like names and like and all that. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it really cheapens it up, and then, you know, you could move in the direction of, you know, like trying to force people to become channel members to talk in the live chat. Honestly, I don't really like it. And so that's the reason why we don't run channel memberships. We're never going to run channel memberships. You know, and of course, if you want to support the channel, feel free to. Super chats are the way we get supported. So, you know, it's a really optional, voluntary thing. We don't force anyone. We don't bring it up a lot. You know, it's just there. If you want to, you can help us out. YouTube takes 30% of it. We get 70%. But that's the way we support our channel and keep it running. But I don't think we'll do channel memberships just because it just seems tacky to me. But with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you for the question. I hope we were able to clear that up.
All right, and up next, we have a question from David Prange, who says, do we feel sorry for untrained Russian conscripts?
They kind of, I mean, I kind of do. I mean, most of these guys, though, remember in the videos at the beginning of the war, yes, I would fight and die for Mother Russia. I would kill Ukrainians all day. Well, will you sign up on this roster? No. And then they run off. And this is probably the same guys, although I don't want to put that on all of them. Probably a lot of them don't want to be there. You know, but then, you know, anyways. I do feel a little bit of sympathy for them. At the same time, knowing that the conscripts and poorly trained, those are the most volatile troops you can put anywhere. They will commit more war crimes than anyone else just because they're freaked out and stressed out. So with that, I would have to say I kind of feel sympathy for them in a way, but they could also be committing a lot more war crimes than even the average Russian, and they still commit a lot of war crimes. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Karen Vaughn, who says, do we know the status of the bridge from Crimea to Russia?
We do, in a way. We know that the road bridge has pretty much been knocked out completely. Only one lane is open, and will most likely remain that way for the remainder of the war. And also, the railroad bridge appeared to sustain some damage, but we don't know how bad it is. We don't know if they've been able to repair that yet, whether the tempered steel the bridge is made out of has been weakened so badly that they can no longer use it. We don't really know on that side of things. So it's kind of a half and half answer. We know that the road bridge has practically been knocked out for all effective purposes, but the railroad bridge is a little bit questionable, and we don't have enough information to really make a clear discernment on what's happening with that bridge. And so with that, I hope we've been able to answer that question fairly well, at least give as much information as we can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from John C., who says, do you think it's possible for NATO troops to secure the north and west of Ukraine as peacekeepers in order to free up Ukraine's full military to fight in the south and the east?
Could you reread that one again real quick, because I think I missed it.
Do you think it's possible for NATO troops to secure the north and west of Ukraine as peacekeepers in order to free up Ukraine's full military to fight in the south and the east?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Because if NATO enters the country, that we could be considered to be directly involved in the war diplomatically. So it's a really tough decision to make. They wouldn't be in combat areas, and those NATO soldiers would most likely serve as shields in between the Ukrainian citizenry and Russian missile attacks. So in a way, I could see the benefit. In others, I could see it going in a very bad diplomatic route, which would lead us directly into war. Like, what if, for example, the Russians just decided, well, NATO soldiers in the way, we just hit them too, and then they kill 3 NATO soldiers from the United States? Oh man, all hell breaks loose. It would happen almost immediately. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. It's kind of a double-edged sword. There's benefits and negatives to it. It's just really a question of whether you find the benefits to outweigh the negatives or whether the negatives outweigh the benefits. And I'm kind of on the fence with that one. I can't really flip to one side or the other. And so with that, I hope that does address the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Just John, who says, what should the U.S. do if Putin uses a nuke?
What should Ukraine do if Putin uses a nuke?
U.S.
While the U.S. would get involved directly in the war, I think we've already threatened that we would obliterate the Black Sea Fleet in the very opening hours of the war, which is entirely possible. We have done something similar like that before. Well, I'm gonna have to go back on that one. No, we haven't. Like, we kind of did that to Iraq, but did Iraq have a navy? Not really. It was more like patrol boats that we wiped out. So in modern history, we've never really gone up against a country that had a navy for us to do something like that, but I wouldn't doubt it, especially considering that the Moskva was sunk quite easily. The rest of the fleet could probably be sunk in due time. So with that in mind, I would have to say, I mean, maybe. They could probably do that. But in terms of a response, I believe that U.S. forces, if a tactical nuke was used in Ukraine, would be flowing over the border like the 101st in Romania, and they would immediately be supporting Ukrainian frontline troops, and we would probably see that this would be considered the Ukrainian theater at that point. There would probably be multiple theaters in the war, and the United States would be the, I guess you could say, central commander of the Allied forces, the coalition forces, Allied forces in Ukraine and in all theaters worldwide. And so with that, I hope that does address the question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And I know what you're about to say, Matthew.
And of course, we have to address that super chat that just came in from Terrace McGitts once again. This time, Terrace put in a $100 super chat and didn't leave a comment. But Terrace, thank you so much. That is very generous, and I know the Enforcer wants to add a few words too.
Yes, I do. I thank you so much for the support, Terrace McGitts. That kind of support helps out this channel massively. It helps this channel to keep running. It helps us to keep the lights on. It helps us to keep doing everything behind the scenes, so that way we can focus on this full time. You didn't even leave a comment. I gotta be honest. It feels criminal. And let me explain. Support is support, and support is just to help out this channel. And originally there wasn't supposed to be any questions attached, but people started to attach questions, and I feel like this now, that the question is kind of like my return of a thanks for the support, because you get something out of it. And when people throw in like $100 super chat, I feel bad. I feel bad in a way, because I'm like, man, I can't even really address anything. I can't even like help you to get anything out of it. I know that whenever y'all throw that in, because I've talked to a whole bunch of y'all that have thrown in support without a comment. Y'all like, well, the channel is what we get out of it. But still, to me, I feel like you could get more out of it, like an answer to a question or something. But I thank you so much for the support, Terrace McGitts. It really does help us out a lot, and it helps this channel to keep on running. And so with that, thank you so much once again. It does mean a lot to us, and it helps us to keep this thing rolling, and helps us to keep the Lee Spring Army marching forward. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and next up, we have a question from Melissa Smith, who says, do we know much about the explosion in Belarus today?
Explosion in Belarus?
Yes.
Explosion in Belarus? When did that happen? Explosion in Belarus today. What the hell? Oh. When did this happen? This was in 2011. 2 days ago. This is from Newsweek. So part of a railway was damaged 2 days ago in between Russia to Belarus. But I can't find any news about anything beyond this, and it looks like the last news we got was from the BBC over 11 years ago. So with that, I'll be trying to look into that a little bit more after stream. I believe that will most likely be included in the next day's news, but so far I don't think we have any news on that right now. But thank you once again for keying us in on that, so that way we can keep an eye out for it, and if we do find anything, we'll make sure to report it tomorrow. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for keying us in on that.
And next up, we have a question from Winnebago, who says, is it possible that it's been so long since Russia did maintenance on their nukes that they've actually lost the required info to make new ones?
Oh, no.
I lost the instructions to create our nukes. Could you imagine them saying that?
It is okay, Vladimir Putin. We have the blueprint to make a new Satan. You know, something interesting? You know, the Russians today, I got to say this, Matthew, real quick. The Russians today say that they're now fighting Satanism in Ukraine. Isn't that funny? And isn't that
Satanism?
Satanism. And isn't that funny coming from a country whose primary nuclear weapon is called the Satan Intercontinental Ballistic Missile?
That's a little ironic, isn't it?
A little ironic, don't you think? I'm just saying, it's a little ironic. But moving on to answer that question. And can you reread it again real quick, Matthew? Because I think I just lost it.
Is it possible that it's been so long since Russia did maintenance on their nukes that they've lost the required info to make new one?
Probably not. That kind of information is usually kept alive quite well. It's considered a national security imperative by most nations like the United States. And so I feel like that wouldn't be the case. But then again, you can't really put anything beyond the Russians. And so with that, I hope that does address that question fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
All right. And next up, we have a $5 super chat from S. Winiger, who says, I may have missed a covering by you two, but Israel struck a drone manufacturing plant in Syria that was financially backed by Iran over the weekend.
And thank you for the support, S. Vinegar, or Vinegar. And also, we did not cover that on this channel, but that's still interesting to hear. And also, the Israelis do that quite often, to be quite honest. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, S. Vinegar, and we will look into that, and we will see what kind of information we can get. Also, according to what we know, the Prime Minister of Israel is currently in the United States presenting information that the Iranians are supplying the Russians with drones, specifically the Shahed 136. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Laszlo, who says, what do we know about whether civilians who live in occupied territory are being allowed to stay there or forced to relocate into Russia?
Well, it appears from what we know in Kherson, not all of them are being moved out. It seems like around a third of them are being moved, which suggests that they may be collaborators. It may also suggest that they just are trying to do something to hinder the Ukrainians, and that's the maximum amount of people they can get out. We're not entirely sure, and we also don't know what they're going to be doing inside of Russia. A lot of Ukrainians have been relocated into Russia at this point from occupied territories throughout the entirety of the war, but sadly, we really don't know what happens to them beyond them being moved. And so with that, I hope that does address the question fairly well. We don't have a lot of information to work with there, sadly. And so with that, we're going to be moving on from that question and to 3 more ones from tonight. And so with that, what is the third to last question of the night?
And also, folks, I know it was a bot, but I see a lot of folks responding to the bot thinking it was a real comment. The person by the name of Cat J&W was simply trolling. We will never, ever charge anyone to chat in the live chat. That's never been an option for us and never will be. And that person was just saying that stuff just to create lies. So I know the enforcer probably has something to weigh in on that, but no. Well, it is so crappy to charge somebody to chat in the live chat. This is YouTube, and it should be free to comment.
You know what's funny is that I sat there and made it clear we would never do that because it's cheap and it cheapens the channel, and it's forcing people to pay to watch and enjoy. And I made that clear. And let me go back and reiterate that again real quick. We will never have channel memberships on this channel, and we will also never force anyone to have a channel membership to talk in this live chat. I find that to be one of the key pinnacles of this channel, is that anyone on the internet can click on this stream without having to watch a single ad. They can get right on here, and as long as they're a subscriber, they can talk on this channel as much as they want. Of course, you know, not on politics, but really on anything else. and they can just watch it free. I think that's the best thing about this channel. You can support it if you want, like right there, like yo STU just threw in €1, and thank you so much for that. You can support it if you want, but if you don't want to and you can't, you can watch it for free. We will never have channel memberships. We will never make you pay a channel membership to talk in the live chat. I think that is a tacky thing to do. I don't really like it, and I feel like that is just like getting a rag and just trying to squeeze every dollar out of it, and that just seems very low down to me, and I don't like the idea of it, and we're never going to do that. And so with that, I hope that does address that. I hope that clears that up. We never even sent that. That person was trying to stir up some crap. If you go back and rewind through the stream, you can hear me say that we would never do that because it's tacky. And so with that, we are on to the next one. The second to last one of the night, actually.
And this one goes to Thomas Kruger, who says, do you think the Russians were surprised by the way that HIMARS changed the battlefield?
I think they were, because the Russians, of course, technologically, it's just out of their realm to think that a MLRS could hit a pinpoint target from 50 miles away, yet the HIMARS was able to. And you can see that their supply lines, their communication hubs, and their command centers were not geared up for that kind of artillery system, and that thing literally just started shredding them apart. Everything behind the lines just ceased to exist once that thing was there. And so with that, I hope that does address that question fairly well, because I think it's a fairly obvious one, but a great question nonetheless, and a very introspective one on how Western support has truly changed the war in Ukraine's favor. And so with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
Right, and that person is What Else Happened, who says, could those guys in the civilian car have been attempting to desert, hence the firing by the other soldiers?
Desert? No, I don't think they were trying to desert. I think they were trying to move positions, probably retreat further behind the checkpoint. But I don't think they were deserting. I don't think the checkpoint knew that either. I think that they thought that it was some vehicle trying to run through their checkpoint, and so they just started shooting it up. They didn't care who it was, whether it was a civilian, a Ukrainian. As far as they knew, it was not a Russian, which shows you how poor their communications were. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much once again for watching, and I thank you all so much for enjoying this news and also throwing in some really interesting questions both in the live chat and in the super chats. And I thank everyone for supporting us and helping this channel to keep on running. If you enjoyed this stream and you are brand new, and we have a decent amount of brand new viewers, make sure to hit the subscribe button, because hitting the subscribe button allows you to know when this stream runs, which is every single day of the week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays. We take that day off. But every other day of the week, you can expect us to be here at the exact same time every single day, covering the past 24 hours of the war. And so with that in mind, I will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to report on day 247 of the war in Ukraine. Thank you all once again. It has been a complete pleasure once more. I hope you all have a great night. Take care. And here is the Ukrainian anthem, the probably best anthem and outro there is. And so with that, good night, take care, and stay safe.
Yes. The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці, запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці, душу й тіло ми нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького